Thank you all, and welcome to this meeting of the Decommissioning Oversight Board. I'm Tom Congdon. I'm the chair of the Decommissioning Oversight Board and the executive deputy at the New York State Department of Public Service. Appreciate everyone's attendance tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Tom Kaczmarek to do a roll call and to go over some meeting logistics. Tom Kaczmarek.
Thanks, Tom. As Tom said, my name is Tom Kaczmarek, and I serve as the executive director of the DOB. As I call your name, just please indicate your presence quickly. Tom Congdon.
Present.
John Sipos.
Present.
Senator Harcum. Here. Assemblywoman Levenberg.
Here I am.
Kelly Turturro.
Present.
Alex Damiani. Here. Jane Thompson.
Present.
Mark Pattison. Linda Malave.
Here.
Jennifer Waka.
In attendance.
Thank you. Joe Leary.
Here.
Dave Lockbaum. Richard Webster.
Yep, here.
Teresa Knickerbocker.
Present.
Richard Becker. Here. Susan Spear.
Here.
County Board Member Ulay. Colin Smith. Superintendent Trombley.
Present.
Bill Smith.
Here.
Tom Carey.
Here.
And Lou Picani.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Before I turn it back to Chair Congdon, as he mentioned, I just want to provide a few brief reminders to our panelists and participants to promote a smooth meeting. To our in-person board members and guest presenters, please speak into the mic to ensure your comments are clearly heard and accurately recorded. And also indicate your name when you are speaking. That will support our transcription of this meeting. To our panelists joining by Zoom, please keep your mics muted unless you are speaking. To our Zoom participants, please reserve the chat feature for reporting technical issues to our AV team. Any questions captured in the Q&A field are able to be saved and reviewed. And with that, Tom, I'll turn it right back to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Tom. And thanks for all you do to set us up for success. We can't do these meetings without you, Tom. We really appreciate all your work. We have a big agenda again this evening. We're going to cover some housekeeping for the closure task force. We're going to hear from the state agencies on some of their oversight activities since our last meeting. We are going to hear from Holtec on activities at the site since the last meeting and what's planned for the coming months. And then we're going to turn it over to two guest presenters. The first will be Arnie Gunderson from Fairwinds Energy. Welcome, Arnie. Thank you for being here. And we will also hear from our own Bridget Freimeyer from the Department of Public Service to talk about alternatives to the previously planned discharge of wastewater to the Hudson. Then we will have the remainder of the time this evening for public statements. A number of you have pre-registered. We will take them in the order of registration and get through as many of them as we can. Next slide. On the Indian Point Closure Task Force, as folks know, there are technically two bodies, the task force and the Decommissioning Oversight Board. The task force by statute has to provide annual reports. We tend to issue those for public comment before they are finalized, and I want to make a public announcement that the next annual report will be issued in draft form for public comment today or tomorrow. And so folks should look out for that. There should be no surprises in the annual update if you are regular attendees to these meetings, and if you pay attention to our website, it's all information that we've discussed, but it's a nice inventory of activities of the DOB and task force work. And we welcome feedback through the public comment process before we finalize it. Comments will be due Well, the deadline will be in the public notice that will accompany the issuance. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to, is it John that's going to start? John Sipos, to provide an overview of some of the state activities.
Thank you, Tom. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all again. So this part of the meeting.
Hi, County Legislator. Welcome.
Good evening, forgive me, parking.
No,
out there was-
please, no worries at all. I'm glad you arrived because I failed to introduce Superintendent Tremblay as well, and you and he are both newer members to the DOB, and I want to welcome you to your first meeting, so thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, so this portion of the meeting will be providing some state agency oversight descriptions that have occurred since the last meeting. First up is a report on the TIP hotline. As of Monday, there were no tips, whistleblower complaints of that sort. So we're going to turn it over to the next page, which is the monitoring update. And these are the printouts of the 4 remaining Reuters-Stokes monitors, and these results are consistent, entirely consistent with previous reports that we have provided to the Oversight Board and to the community. So there are no changes there. Flipping to the next page. On the oversight aspects, state agencies have been in contact with Holtec regarding minimum trust fund balances. We have had meetings with them about it, and again, this is a unique safeguard that the state built into the joint proposal and the commission accepted as part of its order to ensure that there are sufficient funds for decommissioning and site restoration. We provide here a list of the meetings that have occurred with Holtec, and one occurred earlier this month. And Holtec, as we noted in the last bullet, has also reported that it remains in compliance with the minimum trust fund balance obligations. What we provide on slide 11 is a summary, and this is of decommissioning trust fund balances. This is based on reports that Holtec makes to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the federal oversight agency, and all reports to that agency, such reports must be accurate and fulsome, given the federal regulatory agencies' authorities and the obligations and the regulations there. So when you sum up the totals on the bottom line of the chart that we have here, it's approximately, I believe, $1.8 billion. And the reports are also on the DOB website. They're also on the NRC's Adams website, and are easily available for review. So turning to our DPS oversight activities, we are joined here tonight by our resident site inspector, Inspector Cliff Chapin, and also, as Tom said, we have our chief, Bridget Freimeyer here, who will be giving a presentation later on. But staff has been looking at the financial protection aspects as indicated. There has been an emergency plan revision, and there have been, and as well as the property damage insurance aspects. State regulators have been present at monthly meetings that Holtec has provided, along with other interested governmental entities who are able to join that, and Holtec has provided information to the state at those meetings. Also, one thing that may not have gotten a lot of awareness, recently Holtec and Consolidated Edison filed a petition to provide for the transfer of control of the switchyard area, and this goes back to when Entergy transferred the property or the site to Holtec. It actually, given the way the site was defined, it brought along the segment of the property, the segment of the site that involved the switchyard equipment. So this proposal here, which has been publicly noticed in the New York State Register, is a sort of a realignment and adjustment between Holtec and Con Ed regarding the control of that, of those systems and those components. And at the bottom, we do provide the number for the state agency proceeding here. It's a proceeding before the Public Service Commission. If anyone wishes to comment, there's an opportunity there to look at it. Moving on, there has been significant decommissioning activity work that has occurred at the site since we last spoke and over the last year. There are a number of segmentation actions that have occurred. These are all, most of these, I should note, are inside existing structures, either the turbine building or the containment structures themselves, including the Unit 2 reactor head cutting, the Unit 2 cavity leak repair preparations, the Unit 3 feed water heater removal, and there was also a safety walk down for Indian Point Unit 1. So that is work that is continuing on as part of decommissioning. As folks know, and I believe as we discussed at the previous two meetings, the NRC, with the support of its inspector staff, has been looking at a compliance issue concerning the fabrication. By fabrication, I mean the construction, the making of the dry casks. And we provide here some updates on that. NRC did issue a notice and a safety determination regarding this issue, which really is going to the factory and what goes on at the factory and a certain construction aspect regarding the dry casks. And again, I believe as we said at the last meeting, the NRC, that's the federal regulator, has determined that there was an extremely low safety significance, essentially not a significant safety issue from the NRC. That is what the NRC determined.
If I may, John, NRC will be coming to our next meeting as well, and we'll have further discussion of this and other NRC activities in June.
And I think that pretty much completes the circle from a DPS perspective. I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Tuturo from the Department of Environmental Conservation to touch on some DEC aspects.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everyone. So in terms of the administrative consent order requirements, the investigation, as I've mentioned in the past, will be done under remedial investigation work plans. Back in October of 2023, DEC approved a draft remedial investigation work plan for one portion of the site. That is the Lafarge former Spectra construction area, which Holtec refers to as AOC 118. So that work plan was approved by DEC in October of 2023. The consent order requires that Holtec provide DEC 2 weeks notice prior to field activities. Holtec provided DEC that notification on March 13th of 2024, and they began investigation activities on March 28th, 2024. Those investigation activities Holtec reported to DEC included soil borings, collection of soil samples, and installation of groundwater monitoring wells. And DEC anticipates, based on the schedule that Holtec shared, that we will have a report summarizing the investigation by July of 2024. Next slide, please. So in terms of the speed use permit process, Holtec had submitted additional information that DEC requested back in November. Our staff continue to review that information. As I've mentioned in the past, as soon as we have a draft speed use permit prepared, we will issue that speed use permit for public comment and take public comment on the draft speed use permit. And next slide, Tom. And then finally, DEC continues to oversee the closure and assessment of all of the petroleum tanks that are on the site. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Kelly. I want to open it up to the DOB members for discussion. Yes, Pete?
Thank you very much for all the presentations. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. Quick comment and then a quick question, if I may. The comment is based on conversations with the mayor and the superintendent, who were concerned about state financial support if the process lagged on. I spoke with, at the budget hearing, I asked on the record the Commissioner of the Public Service Commission, Rory Christian, if from their perspective they would be open to having that conversation about some form of extended relief should the process drag on. He said they'd be willing to have that conversation. So premature to say anything more than that at this point, but you know, those conversations can happen if need to. So the question I have for John, you mentioned the emergency plant revision. What was that again?
So the reference was to the emergency plan or planning
Oh, it's an
aspects.
emergency plan.
Sorry, I was probably rushing through there.
I'm sorry,
So-
did I miss that?
So
Well, the
it,
emergency plan, what is going on with the emergency
So,
plan? Thank you.
as Holtec exceeded the requirement to move the fuel that was in the densely packed spent fuel pools to the dry cask storage facility outside, Holtec, met the deadline. In fact, they met it by more than a year in advance. So they completed that early. But once spent nuclear fuel is out of the pool and into the cask, it changes the way that the emergency plan would work. And actually, it really, the plan and the focus of the plan really shrinks down.
Yeah,
because
reduces
you no
the-
longer have the fuel packed together so tightly in the pool, so that the plan can evolve, and it really does shrink down.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thanks so much for that update, and I'm also supportive of the comment that Senator Harcum made to try to extend the funding over the course of a longer period. I just was curious for the all the work that's currently being done. Do we have a number of employees on site? How many people are actually on site doing all of the work of, and also, I have a list of questions, so that's number one. My second question is, where did the U2 reactor head go? Unit 2 reactor head go? And I'm just curious about that. And then the in terms of the NRC, the dry cask construction violations, are we able to see that report also? Are we able to see, exactly what the violations were, and have some kind of an understanding of why the NRC felt like that they were insignificant? And then that question got answered. And then in terms of the speedies permit, I know it's a lot, but I'm just going to throw them all out there and you can answer. What is exactly is the permit now for? It says governs discharges from the main facility. Discharges of what? Not clear what that is. That's it.
Why don't we start with the last one with Kelly, and then we can move to the other ones. And I actually think some of your questions are going to be more appropriate for the whole tech presentation when they're at the table, to
Okay.
answer employee numbers and things of that nature. But
Are they not, did you say they're not coming?
They're here tonight.
Oh,
They're going to
okay.
come up to the table for their
Oh, got it.
presentation
Okay.
next on the
Okay.
agenda.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's fine.
Okay.
So Assemblywoman, in terms of the Speedies permit, that's exactly why DEC had asked for that full technical review. We had a Speedies permit in place governing the operations at the facility. And with the change to operating facility to a decommissioning facility, we wanted to understand exactly the nature of discharges that were happening at the facility. We asked Holtec for that information, they submitted it, and our staff is now reviewing it. But there continue to be, and Holtec can comment on this as well, but there continue to be discharges, not necessarily as we have talked about in the past from the spent fuel pools, but just normal operations of any facility can have discharges, not from the radioactive areas of the plant, but just normal areas of the facility.
Okay, and so I'm going to take the rest of the questions probably in reverse order. I think the last question you asked was about the NRC enforcement process, and I'll provide a little more information on that. So the NRC did release a report, and I believe it is available from the hyperlink that we have on our slide here. I will also note, and just to put some context in, the violation that the NRC is looking at regarding Holtec's manufacturing processes involves changing how a certain subcomponent is attached inside the dry cask, and the change was from a weld to a bolt, and this is to ensure that the internal lattice work, the framework for the dry, for the spent nuclear fuels remains aligned within the cask. And so Holtec changed, as I said, weld to bolt, and that is what NRC is asserting is a violation, that occurred without a prior notification to the NRC and a prior NRC approval. I will also note that recently, I believe it was this year, on behalf of the state of New York, I participated in a conference call with the NRC and with other sites around the country. And, on behalf of New York, I advocated to the NRC enforcement team. I said, what you do from an enforcement perspective, you do from an enforcement perspective, but don't come to the decommissioning trust fund, if there's any financial consequence. So I just, I appreciate your question, and I want you to know that DPS staff is watching that and is seeking to ensure that the decommissioning trusts are maintained and are not sort of used for other purposes. You asked about the units.
Just before you get off that, but just as a follow-up, obviously, I agree with you on that point, but, is this a Boeing situation? I don't think any of us want to see a door flying open on a dry cask storage if, the bolt versus the weld is not the best thing. I think it's more to the point of what is the safest and why was the change made without the oversight?
So I'm not going to, I appreciate, and I understand that comment, and, probably in some way agree with you. I'm not, by reporting what NRC is doing, I'm not necessarily saying that NRC or Holtec is right. I'm just trying to report the facts to everyone and to provide some background as to to what is going on here. Certainly, and I think it's appropriate to, again, note that the NRC has looked at it. They have an inspector who is detail-oriented, and ultimately NRC concluded, and I'm just reporting it here, that it was, this violation was of low safety significance. They looked at the various failure mechanisms, what would happen if a cask tipped over, and they concluded, and again, speaking for NRC, that bolt versus weld would not have a significant negative environmental impact. So just to round that out. You also asked about the Unit 2 reactor head, so that is being separated and segmented. I do not know, sitting here right now, whether those parts have departed the site, but that is the general approach, that there are reactor vessel internals. They get cut up, they get put in boxes, and they get shipped to a appropriate disposal site. And I'm sorry to say, but to your first question, which I am coming to last, the exact number of headcount employees as of today, I don't have that right here, but we can, either we can get that, or maybe it will be discussed.
We'll pose the
later
question to Holtec when they're on the
Thank you.
table. And I believe all of the NRC inspection reports have been placed on our website, the DOB. So to your other question about will we see the report, it's been distributed to the DOB members and on the website. Thank you.
I just have a question for Kelly.
Yeah.
Kelly, we've got the picture on one of these AOCs, but can you give us more of an overall framework? How many AOCs are there? What's the schedule for actually carrying out characterization? Who sets the schedule?
So that would be a question for Holtec, in terms of their schedule for submitting us the investigative work plans.
So you don't have any control over the schedule?
No.
And do you know how many?
Not off the top of my head, but I can certainly get that for you, Richard.
More or less, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's no estimate for when they might finish characterization of the site?
You would have to ask Holtec that question.
Okay. You don't have any estimate?
No.
Yeah, okay.
Mayor?
The village board had sent a letter to the governor, and I'm sure Dana and Pete, you've seen that, and we were asking for the extension because we were under the assumption that this was going to be a prompt decommissioning. As we can see, this is going off the rails fast. So we do appreciate your support with that. It's important to us. We only have a few more years of the cessation fund, and we were hoping for release of some of the parcels, but things are not working out that way. So we appreciate whatever support you can give to the village. And also, I will speak for the superintendent, the school district. Absolutely.
You did it much better than I could, so thank you.
Yes, and we responded to the mayor's letter and indicated the state will continue through the DOB exploring opportunities to continue supporting the taxing jurisdictions, excuse me. The cessation fund, though, I will point out, is a statewide program, and it is a state statute administered by the ESD. And there are several communities, not just the Indian Point community, several communities that have been getting support out of that program, which provides 7 years of assistance. So I'm not sure that that's a feasible option, but there are other mechanisms to support the taxing jurisdictions, including the school district and the village, that we will continue discussing and keeping open mind to any way we can help from the state.
Look forward to those conversations.
Yes, just to confirm, being new to the table, that is a fully funded cessation fund due to a small tax on the utility bill?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a tax, but it is it's through our rate-making powers at the Public Service Commission that, I'll just quickly give you the mechanism. So the state program is the cessation program, that's in permanent statute. And one of the first things this body started to discuss around 2017-18 was whether, it's great that the law exists, but is there money and can a district actually plan for having all 7 years of the assistance that's laid out in the statute? And we were explaining initially at the time that you can count on it, however, it's still subject to annual appropriations in the budget. The budget is only adopted for 1 year at a time. And that was a big issue for this community, and the community raised that as a huge concern because you couldn't financially plan if you were subject to annual appropriations and you weren't sure that you'd have that full 7 years of assistance. And so I and my colleagues brought that back to the State Energy Planning Board, which is a totally separate body, which under state energy law adopts regular state energy plans that all agencies then must take actions to support. Our actions have to be consistent with the state energy plan. Through the work of this body, the state energy plan was made aware of one of the, say, weaknesses of the cessation program for communities, and to help make that a better and stronger program, they made an amendment to the state energy plan to indicate that the Public Service Commission could be an appropriate funding mechanism. Since we're talking about the closure of power plants, there's a nexus to our rate-making powers, and the state energy plan asked us to look into having a separate revenue stream that wasn't dependent on state appropriations. So the February 2021, I believe, the state PSC followed the state energy plan guidance and adopted an order that created this assessment, not a tax, that is paid for by all ratepayers in the state, so it's not noticeable on everyone else's bill, but it is a small pennies charge on all consumers that results in an appropriate level of funding that now gives us the ability to say, yes, it is fully funded. So it's a long-winded answer, but to explain how the genesis of that.
Thank you.
So any other questions for the state agencies? Well, thank you all. I'd at this time like to call up Holtec. Frank and Pat, welcome. Hello. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Frank Spagnolo. I'm the Site Vice President at Indian Point. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about some of the work that's going on. The workers here in the audience that are supporting us, we'll talk about what they're doing with the vessel SEG, Unit 1 demolition, and I'm going to introduce conventional plant demolition. Last time I introduced the Unit 1 demo, I introduced the conventional this time, and as we do more and more phases of demo, I'll introduce that and give you updates between board meetings. I'll talk about what the results or the actions we took due to the earthquake, the update on the pipeline certainty update, Lafarge remediation. We'll talk about the finance report that was issued, a brief liquid waste discussion update, NRC inspections, actions, and violations, and then a safety topic. So I'd like to to answer your question, Ms. Levenberg. I'd say about 400 workers at the site right now. So Unit 2, you can see the pictures there. On Unit 2, we've completed the control rod drive shafts. Those ride through the head. That's removed. We suspended plans to commence upper internal segmentation on Unit 2. When we did flood up, we had a small leak on the cavity liner. This leak goes to a tank that's below the liner, designed for it. So we drained back down, we built scaffold, and we are right now doing weld repairs on any imperfections that we see. This has been a long-standing issue at Unit 2. It doesn't exist at Unit 3. We're going to do a permanent repair because at this point, we don't know, once we flood up the cavity, do the vessel seg on Unit 2, we don't know when we're going to drain it back down. So we don't want any leakage in order to have to recircuit back to the pool. So that work should be complete by May, the end of May. On Unit 3, at the last meeting, we were just validating that the core barrel removal stand modification was complete. That was. We returned it to the core, and we prepared for vessel seg. While we were working in Unit 2, we stopped and we moved back everything over to Unit 3. And now lower internal segmentation is in progress. And if you can see the upper left picture there, that shows the saw in the vertical position. And what you're looking at, what it's cutting, if you look at the one that's to the right, that is the actual core. So that's where the fuel was staged in a baffle formation. And those are the walls of the, what we call the lower internals or the core barrel. And the bottom left picture is actually the Unit 2 cavity liner repair. So as you can see, we cut away a section. That blue sealant was supposed to seal all the leaks in the cavity. It failed in several areas, so we peeled it away. We're doing weld repairs in 4 different spots. Then we're going to coat it again with a better sealant this time, a better epoxy coating. We'll flood up and we'll check for any leaks, and then we'll go from there. The plan is, like I said, the end of May, we should know if we're done, and then we'll move ahead, okay? So if we can go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the head. So on Unit 2, we expect to complete the liner repairs and flood up, like I said, by the end of May. And the head segmentation never really commenced. We did some extraneous parts of the head we cut off, but once we identified that we had a leak, in order to drain back down, we would need to put the head back on the core, on the vessel for shielding for the workers. So once we made that decision, we actually put the head back on the core. So that segmentation, once we're done with the cavity liner repair, we'll put a team of workers on that. That'll be segmented up, and we did talk about this on Unit 3. I don't remember the exact number of boxes, but it's a Class A waste that'll be boxed up, and it'll be sent to Texas through our normal shipping process. It should be complete by the end of the year, roughly.
Frank, just for our listening audience, can you explain what Class A is?
I might. So there's several layers, several levels of waste. Most of our waste is what we call exempt waste. It's the lowest level of waste. Level A is the next highest level. Level BC is the next highest level, and then there's greater than Class C. So right now, we're cutting greater than Class C waste in the Unit 3 vessel. The baffle walls that held the fuel for 40 years is considered greater than Class C. It's about as hot as fuel, and it goes into the same type of containers. It goes into a dry fuel container, a little different insert model that holds it. So there'll be 6 what we call greater than Class C containers for each Unit 2 and Unit 3 vessel internals that'll be stored, and that will be shipped with the fuel when the DOE ever picks up the fuel. The A boxes, they can ship, there's DOT approved shipping method for that, it's very simple. And then there's also what we call BC boxes, that's a higher level of waste, not as high as greater than Class C. These are all industry terms, I didn't make them up, I apologize. Those are stored on site until the transportation, we need a license for a transportation mode. So right now, there's no BC shipments that are going on in the country. So we have what we call the interim, it's our old flex building. It was a Radway storage building with 3-foot thick walls, and it's stored in there. And we can store all of our waste, and it'll be there until we ship. And we'll be working with Pilgrim, Oyster, and then Indian Point to ship BC waste over the next decade, really.
That was really helpful, thank you.
No problem. So the pictures here, that is, can you go back one? Sorry. So that is the Unit 2 head as we're putting it back on the cavity. And that's just another close-up of the saw that's cutting through the baffle walls and the core barrel itself. So Unit 1 demo, as you remember, I introduced this at the last DOB. So Unit 1 started to be built in 1956, put in service in 1962. A little different design, but ultimately it's a 4-loop pressurized water reactor. And what you're looking at in the picture, on the upper picture, is an actual view of the steam generators. They're horizontal steam generators, which are a different design than Indian Point 2 and 3. And those insulated pipes that run up the top from vertical, they're called vertical risers, they go to a steam drum. So each steam generator, there's 4 of them, have 3 independent components, 2 drums on the bottom, 1 drum on the top. And right now, what we're doing is we're getting ready to cut all those risers so that we can remove the steam generators. And we'll remove the lower sections, we'll support the top section, cut the risers, remove the lower sections, and then remove the upper sections. And that'll occur over the next 2 years. So, 25, we plan on removing 11 and 12 boiler, and then 26, we plan on removing 13 and 14. So we're doing all the prep work now, and then we'll remove them as we go. They'll be shipped as exempt waste. Con Ed in 93, 4 or 5 timeframe did a full system decon on that and was able to lower fields, so that's not going to be high-level waste. So the work we're doing, we're continuing to cut the loops. You can see the bottom picture is a good graphic of the component on the right with little plywood covers over it is actually the hot and cold legs that go to the Unit 1 core. And on the left, that piece of white insulation or white plastic is actually covering up one of the steam generators. So there was loops in there, pumps and valves, all that's been removed on 11, 12, and 13. We'll complete 14 before the next meeting. And of course, in 1962, asbestos was really good, so this is all asbestos-covered insulation. We're building a tent right now, and then we'll do the asbestos abatement on 11, and then we'll work our way around. And I did report on the last one, there was a polo crane mod that was in place. That is complete, and that's fully functional. So I talked about most of what's going on through the next DOB, 13 and 14 loops. And the picture on the one back, sorry, you're ahead of me. That's actually one of the cold legs, or vertical runs of cold leg. We're removing those around all 4 loops. And then the pictures on the left are a heat exchanger that was also asbestos lagged. We did the abatement, we removed it, and now we're able to remove that. So the process is you remove the hazards, then you remove the components. So I'll introduce some work we're doing on the conventional plan. Actually, John talked about some of it. We had talked about, we're working up a GT23 across the street from the plant. That demo of the GT23 and the fuel oil tank, that's all complete. The cement pads with GT23 are still there. Right now, we're set with what we're doing up there. We have 1 underground storage tank that we need to remove. We're going to work with DEC on that. And then we'll pretty much be done with that for a while. We are working with Con Ed. They have several components that they have to disconnect, kind of what John was talking about. Almost everything coming in and out of the switchyard will be disconnected. The overhead lines and all of the 138, 345 kV lines, and a lot of internal components will be all removed. We're working with Con Ed, and we'll proceed to try to get that done by September. So since we don't, if you visit the plant, you would not need to go through the same security that you had to do before. So that has reduced. You would be able to walk into the GSB, and then once you're badged as a visitor, you'd be able to go right into the plant. So all of that security equipment is no longer necessary. So we're actually supporting Palisades and removing it. And so whatever we can remove, we'll remove. Picture on the upper right is just one of our station batteries. There's probably about 15 station battery banks, and probably 3 will remain, and everything else we're just removing to remove the hazards. Again, that's hydrogen gas generation and the sulfuric acid, so we'll remove them, and we're recycling them. So I gave you a snapshot. There's 49 above-ground storage tanks between Unit 2 and Unit 3. 31 have already been removed. 8 are planned for 2024, and there's 14 total underground storage tanks, and 4 are planned for removal in 2024. And we're also continuing to remove equipment. The picture on the bottom right is one of our feed water heaters. There are 12 on Unit 2, 12 on Unit 3. So far, we've removed 6 on Unit 3. The other 6 should be removed here in a week or two. They're all cut out. A big piece of equipment, they're just big horizontal heat exchangers, and again, we're recycling those. So we expect to complete the Unit 3 feed water heater job before the next meeting and start Unit 2 feed water heaters. And if you were on site today, you would see a 160-foot-long, 400-ton crane that's being assembled in the parking lot. That's being assembled to do work on the roof of the GSB. We're putting new air conditioning units up there. And then that crane will go down to the dock, and we'll start removing the Unit 3 dock components. The traveling screens, since we don't need circ water anymore, we'll remove the traveling screens, circ water motors, go down to the Unit 1 screen wheel house, remove the traveling screens, river water pumps. So all of those components will be removed over the next several months. We'll bring pictures, show these are big components, we need a big crane for it. So that's the goal. The focus is to, everything we need this big crane for, to remove it, and then we'll recycle. And so earthquake response. So as everyone knows, we had an earthquake, 4.8 magnitude earthquake centered in Jersey on April 5th. At the site, it was registered as 3.6 magnitude earthquake. So I got a lot of questions on that. IPEC was seismically designed to withstand an earthquake of peak ground acceleration 0.15 Gs horizontal and 0.1 G vertical, which probably means nothing to everybody here, but engineers don't use the Richter scale. They use Gs in horizontal and vertical. So the value is based on the ability to withstand a Category 7 earthquake on the modified Mercalli intensity scale. Again, nobody else uses that but engineers. The asphyxie pads are built to this standard as well. So the Unit 2, Unit 3 plants were built to that standard. The asphyxie pad was built to that standard. It basically roughly is equivalent to a 6.0 magnitude earthquake. So plant staff were on site. We have a procedure, an AOP, abnormal operating procedure, seismic 1, which basically lists all the equipment in the plant, and the operators and security did their tours. There was no issues, and then the design engineer did his portion of that, and there were no issues. Okay, this one I might need the pointer for. So okay, it doesn't work. So, all right, so.
He can use the cursor, maybe.
Yes, so that little pond there, affectionately we call that Dara's Pond, after the late Dara Gray, who was our environmental, and identified an issue with that pond. So now furthermore, we call it Dara's Pond. So that is basically a groundwater receptacle, and the road right behind it to the south, this is looking south. That road is the gypsum plant access road. And got a call in January from Certainty. I went over there, and their road had water over it, and then you could see it was pooling on the south side of the road. So we contacted Village of Buchanan. We looked for city water leaks. We looked for any other leaks in the plant. This is so far away from the plant. There's no plant components. This is as far south as you can get. We did sample it. There is no radioactive component to it whatsoever. And then we put a drone up, because you really can't see this as clear. That's a drone shot. And we could see that Dara's Pond is overflowing to the east and south. So it's overflowing because since September of 2023, we've had 7.5 inches of rain more than the 30-year high value. I didn't get that myself. We called in hydrologists from TRC to help us determine what's going on. The big concern was the pipeline. That's also the route that the pipeline takes, so we brought in Enbridge. Enbridge did their evaluation. There was no safety concerns with the pipeline. The only concern really is the gypsum plant road. It's not being undermined. So TRC is going to give me a report that we'll review and see what we can do with it. It does not communicate with the Hudson. It basically flows south through there's another pond, and then it flows to the ball field, which I'm sure you know is flooded, and then that eventually gets to Lake Meehan? So that's where, that's the flow it's taking. Everything right now is it's saturated. So we expect with warmer weather, this'll clear up and, you know, we don't have rain. But so far, there's no concerns. And Kelly already talked about the parcel D, where that, on the other south side of the road is also parcel D. That is one of our remedial investigation work plans. So that, like Kelly said, that plan, all the samples have been obtained. We should get a final report in July. We don't expect to do any remediation. The only reason you were asking about AOCs, and I don't have a number off the top of my head. I'm not prepared for that, but we'll get it through Kelly. The only reason that was an AOC is because when Spectra built the pipeline, that was their laydown area, and technically, Entergy at the time didn't have a presence out there, so we don't know what happened. So we said it's an AOC in case any of these trucks had hydraulic leaks, motor oil leaks, they spilled diesel fuel while they were fueling up their equipment. So that's what we're looking for. If the remedial investigation work plan comes back with work for us to do, then we submit a plan to DEC, and that'll get approved, and then we'll do the remediation, then we'll do the sampling again, and we'll have the results, and then that piece of property will be one of the AOCs that'll be clear. Okay, so this is a cut and paste directly out of the report that we filed on March 29th. So every year we have to report in accordance with 10 CFR 50, Section 82, termination of license, on behalf, the company on behalf of Indian Point submits the annual report. So the estimates provided use all 2020, December 31st, 2023 numbers, just as John showed you. The estimates provide, according to HCI, we do not have any further action required to demonstrate adequate funding. John already talked about the trust fund balances as of the 31st. If you actually read the report, the very last line of tables 3A, B, and C are the trust fund balances at the end of everything. Right now, full license termination based on DOE doing their part of fuel transfer is 2063. And that would be the trust fund balances at the end of that. So, and also, as John alluded to, we are maintaining our $400 million for the 10 years following transaction close date. Okay, so liquid waste discharge. I do want to close the loop on two items that I brought up at the last meeting about tritium removal. So there were two vendors that approached us with sound ideas on how to remove tritium from the water. So on November 10th, we met with Veola, we discussed the potential tritium removal. They would use a modular detritation system. And when we actually explained the scope of it, this works in the lab, it doesn't work in the commercial process. So they basically made a decision to move away from tritium issues. Then we had a further, I think it was at the December DOB, Nathan Plummer was here with some of his support. So we met with him. He was the hemp guy, as everybody remembers him. It's basically called phytoremediation. So we did narrow it down that hemp is not the only product that can be grown. Wheat can, alfalfa. So we continued with a conversation with him, getting away from hemp, to get that off the table, to understand what the technology was. So on the 24th, we met with him. We requested more information because I need to know how big the equipment is, what the power consumption rates are, what the cycle is, what the cost is. On April 22nd, we did have, they provided the proposal. They kind of changed the plan a lot. They no longer want to grow plants, they want to use sawdust of hemp again, or soybean, and then basically just sprinkle it with liquid waste, and so it's not the same type of plan. But they did introduce another player into this, and he uses electrical molecular dissociation to enhance tritium removal. So I'm talking to them, see if any of these plans are sound. Nobody in the country is using them. So, and then, as everyone knows, on April 18th, we did file a lawsuit in the Southern District of New York regarding Chapter 279 of the laws of 2023. And a lot of the questions we're just not going to be able to discuss due to pending litigation on liquid waste, okay? So NRC inspection reports. So NRC inspection reports are public documents once we get them. They do every quarter they issue a report. They debrief us at the end of the quarter. We just had a debrief last week. The NRC has 45 days to issue a report, then it's a public document. So the only public document that's available right now is the one from February 22nd of 2024. That was the fourth quarter exit report, which discussed the charitable donations. This is just a cut and paste out of that. Now, we had the exit debrief on the preliminary report for the first quarter, and that final report I will be able to discuss at the next DOB. And then the last slide talks about a supplemental employee received an injury to the right hand. That was also on John's slide. That was operating a tool with a 30-foot shaft, and one operator on one end of the tool went in the wrong direction and twisted someone's finger. So he's okay. He's back. He never left. He never lost any work time, and it was an easy enough fix to just not use that tool. There's a better way. And as you can see, the 2024 dose report, since we're in the first quarter, this is our quarterly dose report, and we're well on track. And that's really all I had.
Thank you, Frank. Questions for our Holtec folks?
I have one really quick one.
Sure.
What is supplemental employee?
A contractor?
And when you mentioned those 400 employees, does that include supplemental?
Correct.
Frank, thank you for the report, and I was very pleased to see that you guys are looking at alternative ways of dealing with the tritium, because I don't think there's any established other way of doing it, and we don't want to keep this tritiated water there forever, so we're pleased to hear that you're moving on, because I know in a lot of the projections that Holtex has made, it said that the fact that currently, since you can't discharge into the river, it's going to delay the process 8 years. But I wasn't sure where that 8 years came from, since there isn't an alternative right now for getting rid of the tritium. And the second question, just as a follow-up, I did a lot of research on this online, certainly not an expert, but I do know that certain countries are mixing it with cement-like materials, turning it basically into a concrete block that can be buried and naturally decompose deep into the ground or be transported elsewhere.
Did I have a question there? I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, the question is, have you looked into that and how you came up with the 8 years for?
Oh, I'm sorry, the 8 years. So I talked about it in the last slide. 8 years was based on what we project the lawsuit, somewhere in that window to take. The 8 years is based on the fact that if I can't release liquid waste, I'm not going to be able to take down the Unit 2 or Unit 3 VCs, Unit 2 or Unit 3 spent fuel pools, and I won't be able to take down any of the support structures. So the nucleoside support structures, because eventually, no matter what, we have to move this waste around from the tanks that they're in now to process it. Even in Arnie's, what he's going to talk about, all that waste would need to be processed through our existing systems. So we need the current infrastructure that we have. So in order to do that, I also need power, so that impacts the turbine buildings. That's why when I talked about what we're doing on the conventional side, the feed water heater bays are really outside buildings. They're tied to the turbine hall, but I could literally gut those buildings without impact. The Unit 2, Unit 3, and Unit 1 docks really aren't support. Unit 2 dock supports us for dilution, but the Unit 1 and 3 docks don't. I could remove all of that in the condensate polisher building. So what we can do, we will do. The security buildings, I can remove them. I don't need them. Where it locks me up is when I just can't, when I need to keep the infrastructure available to process waste, no matter where I put it.
And just for clarification, Frank, you used the term VC. Could you tell us what that's?
Those are the big domes you see.
The containment domes.
They're called vapor containments, domes. Yes,
Thanks.
sorry.
Can I just ask for clarification on that? So aren't you processing at some point you have to process the tritium waste, right, and take everything apart from the tritium out of it. Are you doing that now, or are you just waiting?
I don't have any ability to do that now. I can process waste and put it back in the same tank, and it would not be adequate to release. So once you process waste, we process waste on Unit 2. We put it in what we call the waste distillate tank. That tank is recirced 3 times, sampled for all components, including PCBs, then it's released. If I take that and put it back in any tank, then I have to start the process over. You're not really buying anything.
Well, if you had a clean tank, you would be buying something, right?
If I had a what?
If you had a clean tank.
A heating tank?
No.
A clean tank. A different tank? A new tank?
A new tank.
But even,
Tank.
Pristine tank.
I don't want to steal Arnie's, the end of his thing, but at the end, I still need to be able to release that tank.
No, I know, but.
So I still need dilution flow, I still need, to meet my speedies permit, I still need to meet all the NRC requirements, so.
I understand that, but what you were saying, you can't process the waste, and I'm just trying to figure out why. And the reason why is because you don't have a clean place to put it, right?
Yeah, right now, it's not the solution, it's a stop. I don't want to end, I don't want to go, it's not an end solution, because
Understood.
the tanks need to get released somehow.
Right.
Somewhere, they need to. Someday, we can make this our grandchildren's problem if that's what we decide to do.
Well, I guess my question is, could we come up with an interim solution that would then allow you to move more quickly on the demolition?
We're going to give you our diatribe.
Yeah. At the advice of council, we're not going to be able to discuss anything related to wastewater disposal.
That's where we're at.
Thank you, Frank, for the update. And I'm sorry, were you done, Richard? If you had more.
Actually, let me just ask one other question. I actually have 2 questions. One is, on the site remediation, could you answer the questions that Kelly told me to ask you?
Well, I answered, I don't have the number of AOCs that we have, but each AOC is scheduled in our schedule, and it's all tied to partial site release. So parcel D was basically a southern piece of property that's not impacted by any equipment, so we chose to do that. And we'll continue to do other areas of concern that don't have any impact. And I'll give you an example of an area of concern. There's a 1,500-gallon oil tank that used to heat one of the training buildings on site. I don't know, 15 years ago, it overflowed. The vendor that was filling it up overflowed it and spilled 100 gallons, whatever it was. It's well documented. That is now an area of concern. So in order to remediate that, I need to get rid of the tank and do our remedial of it. So most of the AOCs are of that nature.
Right, and I'm actually most interested in the AOCs that are causing impact, unsurprisingly. So for the most contaminated AOCs, do you have any schedule for site characterization of those?
Yeah, it's all in our PSDAR schedule.
That can change, right?
Absolutely.
So is the current schedule the same as the PSDAR?
The current schedule that we have right now is what we just issued in March of this year to the NRC.
So
Any changes, any material changes to that, we have the ability to move items around the schedule
Right.
based on priority. There are no AOCs that are impacting the environment. They're legacy issues. They were cleaned up.
No, that's not true.
Okay.
What about the spent fuel pool leak that goes down into the Hudson?
I don't actually know if that's an AOC. That's part of, see, but AOCs are areas of concern.
Yeah.
The entire nuke site is an area of concern. The entire nuke site. Underneath the reactor is an area of concern.
Right, and I'm asking you, what's the schedule to clean up?
I don't have that. I don't have that information.
Could you give me that information after the meeting?
We'll see what we have public.
Last question. I think at the last meeting you told me that you couldn't estimate the amount of tritiated water on site. As you saw from a letter that I checked, from a letter I sent you a couple of days ago, I checked back, and Rich Baroni, your predecessor, had provided an estimate. So how come Rich Baroni can provide an estimate and you can't?
The advice of council, we will not be discussing anything related to wastewater disposition.
Well, with respect, that is not a legal issue. That is a factual issue about your statements at this meeting. And is your counsel here?
No.
So how are you getting this advice?
I've been told to, at the advice of council, defer anything relating to water disposition.
That's not relating to water disposition.
You're asking me about water on site.
Yeah, but that's not what,
in
if
the
the
disposition.
advice,
That's
if
fine.
the advice of council is water disposition, I'm not asking about that.
Okay.
I'm asking about your ability to estimate the amount of water on the site.
Which would then need to be disposed, which is what I'm not going to comment on.
I'm not asking about disposal.
So could I just interject, because it's not constructive? The issue is that in answering the question in past meetings, Mr. Barone provided a number of 1.3 million gallons on site. Other comments by Holtec over time have also clarified that was at a moment in time, and that there is other activity on site producing more wastewater that is added to whatever that number was when Rich provided it. So can I just ask you, the number is increasing, yes?
Yes.
And the number is increasing because you're not releasing anything that you can't release pursuant to the law in place.
Correct.
Richard, is that, I mean, you understand that there's additional water being
Okay.
added from the processes
I
that they're
understand.
using,
The
right?
question is, if Mr. Barone could provide an estimate of volume then, why can't you provide an estimate now?
Because we're under
No, but you couldn't provide an estimate last time before you'd sued.
Okay, I think, Richard, you've made your point. I think Mr. O'Brien has made his point that he's communicating from their lawyers. And I think maybe we could,
I'm happy to
in
move on.
the interest of efficiency, we could move on.
Yeah, and the mayor had a question as well.
Thank you, yes. Well, I just want to say thank you, of course, I've said thank you for the update, but also we had, the village board had toured Certainty, and that was our question, like, we knew that the property line was right there, the water that was coming into the Certainty lot, so thank you for explaining that. I'll bring that information back to the board. Also, I'm hoping, first of all, I'm pleased that you're looking at other alternatives of how to get rid of the wastewater, the tritium, and by these other processes, that you're looking at that, and you'll continue to look at that. And I know you had said that this isn't done anywhere else in the country, but we have been, this decommissioning process, we've kind of been trailblazers. So maybe perhaps going forward, there might be some type of a technology that will work and that we can, or we can further look into it. But thank you for at least, being open to looking at that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Susan?
Thank you. Is the seismological measuring equipment still functional on site?
No.
So where'd you get the 3.6 number from?
From the website that is put out by the National Geologic Service. It actually has thousands of points. You can find what it was at your house on this website.
Interesting. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I didn't know it existed until after the earthquake either.
One more question. The above Class C waste, that's not the spent fuel rods, where is that being stored on site?
That'll be stored on the Assisi pad.
So it's boxed up and physically on the Assisi pad?
It will. Right now, there's 2 cans of greater than Class C waste, each from the Unit 1, the Unit 2 and the Unit 3 spent fuel pool. There'll be 6 more from Unit 3, 6 more from Unit 2. And that was planned in the design of the Assisi pad.
Thank you.
Yes, legislator?
Thank you so much. Regarding the lawsuit you filed on April 18th, are you able to speak to how those legal fees are being funded? Are any part of the decommissioning trust fund being used to support that lawsuit?
I don't have an answer.
I don't have that answer, honestly, I don't know offhand. Yeah, it would come from the company, because that's who's filing the suit, so.
I think that was an excellent question, and I think we should follow up on that and learn more about how the litigation is being paid for. Other questions? Yes, Superintendent?
So I'm gonna ask a new guy question here. The inspection report regarding the use of the trust fund for community outreach activities is not the intention of the trust fund and is a violation of that. Does that preclude Holtec from providing any other outreach activities outside of that trust fund? So could they use general operating funds to support community outreach?
The
It
company
doesn't
can, oh, I'll
I
ask.
was to say,
go
it doesn't
ahead.
preclude outside, if we choose to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Thank you, Frank. Thanks, Pat. Arnie Gunderson is here from Fairwinds Energy, and at the request of community members, we've invited Arnie to make a presentation. He's given a couple of other presentations that we've circulated videos of to the DOB, so we're familiar with your work, and we appreciate you coming. I want to do just make an announcement by the state. You're going to hear two presentations tonight about alternatives to the wastewater discharge. One is storage on site, which will be presented by Arnie Gunderson. Another is further examination of what occurred at Vermont Yankee, which was shipment off-site. And I want to make clear that this is a Decommissioning Oversight Board that is not the decision maker as to how the water will eventually be disposed of. We are an information sharing body, and we are here to facilitate information exchange. And we're really grateful, Mr. Gunderson, that you made the trip to join us and to share your knowledge with us. And I want to open the floor to you. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Do I need this closer?
You do need to speak into the mic. I'll ask our AV folks to opine.
Okay, let's see that. Wow, thank you. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to speak to you tonight. I want to thank the groups that contacted Fairwinds in the past year seeking our information and the belief that in technical knowledge that Fairwind has. I want to thank Governor Hochul and the DOB and all the advocates that have been seeking to protect the Hudson River by inviting me here to answer your questions. I'd like to give a shout out to my union brethren. For 44 years, my dad was a member of he was a master mechanic in the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic International Union, which rolled into the AFL-CIO back right around the change of the century. I walked the line with him when I was a kid. In my union history, I was the first union kid to ever get a scholarship from my father's company. Before that, it was all managers and doctors. So each summer out of high school, I was a Teamster back when Jimmy ran the union. And between my Teamster wages plus the union kid scholarship, plus about half that my parents were able to chip in, I was able to get out of school debt-free. So I'm deeply appreciative of Teamsters and what unions have done. After I became a whistleblower, I was a high school math teacher and a member of the NEA, which is the teachers union. And I was invited by the NEA to write an article in their magazine. So I appreciate the people that gave us the 40-hour work week. Thank you very much. The board has my CV. It's 16 pages long, and this is going to be a speed date. Okay, we're going to do a real quick thing here. I graduated RPI as Rensselaer up in Troy, New York. With honors cum laude, I was the first in the nuclear engineering department. I earned my reactor operator's license. I was a recipient of Atomic Energy Commission fellowship for my master's degree up there. I was the author of one of the chapters of the very first Department of Energy decommissioning handbook. I was co-author of 3 peer-reviewed papers about the spread of radiation and best-selling author in Japan about the Fukushima meltdown. And I hold a patent on a nuclear power safety device. Professionally, for 20 years after college, I started as an associate engineer and wound up as a senior VP of a company, a nuclear company, that was licensed by the NRC to dismantle nuclear facilities, including shipping port and other non-reactor nuclear facilities. And this is important. When I was a senior VP, we had tough engineering problems, and you get half a dozen engineers in a room, and within a week or so, you figure out solutions. So I just don't buy that argument, oh, we can't do it. My groups created the first thing that could catch a fuel canister that was dropped from 100 feet high. Two-story spent fuel racks, freestanding sliding racks, which is the first in the world, missile shields, turbine nozzle dams, steam generator nozzle dams, rather. So when I hear it can't be done, I just know the power of a group of engineers to come up with solutions. New York State, I think my nuclear career started in New York State when at 8 years old, my mother took me to the Brooklyn Navy Yard to see the Nautilus, which had just, a nuclear-powered sub that had just gone from Seattle under the ice pack and popped up in the Atlantic. And then, of course, I was at Rensselaer. I was on the sailing team. We used to sail on the Hudson River. The reactor I worked at was in Schenectady. And I joined New York State Electric and Gas, and where I met my wife, and who's Fairwind's co-founder. We were married in Owego. We dated in Oswego. We were married in Owego. Our son was born in Johnson City, and I spent many, many family vacations on the Sacandaga Reservoir. So it really is the Empire State, and it's nice to be here today. I got to stop one rumor. There was a rumor floating around. We're whistleblowers, my wife and I. We lost our home. We lost our savings. We lost our pension. And I own no stock in anything. I get by on Social Security. There was a rumor around that I was pushing the Eberline lab that we've channeled our work through because I own stock in the company, and I own stock in nothing. I can't afford it. So let's put that rumor to rest. Briefly on Holtec, I need to note that Holtec has never designed a nuclear power plant, never constructed a nuclear power plant, never operated a nuclear power plant, and never wholly decommissioned a nuclear power plant as of today. Holtec's chief financial officer is suing the company, alleging that he was forced to overinflate the company's assets by $750 million. I think an important comparison here is what happened at Zion. Zion's a nuclear plant just north of Chicago, and it's a 2-unit, 4-loop Westinghouse plant, pretty much identical to Indian Point 2 and 3. Zion was 2 units. And the company that dismantled, it has been completely dismantled by a company called Zion Solutions, and not Holtec, Zion Solutions, for $800 million. So when I hear the amount of money available here, I'm really in awe of what the Zion Solutions was able to accomplish for $800 million. I also need to talk about the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which came up in discussions earlier. The NRC distorted federal law to allow Holtec to license a temporary spent fuel storage facility in the Southwest. Luckily, concerned citizens and states were able to get that reversed. Holtec is licensed to take apart the Palisades plant, and it appears that the NRC is ready to green light, without any legal precedence, the restart up of the Palisades reactor. In addition, the state of Michigan has given Holtec $300 million, and the Department of Energy has given them billions as well. I don't know why. For a company that never designed, never constructed, never operated a nuke, they sure have a great cash flow. We've talked about NRC integrity. I need to point out that in 2017, the Inspector General did a report that they surveyed all of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission staff. 15% of the staff was afraid to talk about a safety problem. 50% of the staff was afraid to put their concern in writing. 85% of the staff would advise a friend not to put it in writing. and every single member of the NRC staff that put a concern in writing in something called a DOP, differing professional opinion, DPO. Every single person experienced retribution within the NRC. So, you know, if you think you're getting an honest broker here, I think you really need to reevaluate the existence of the tooth fairy. I was, as a senior vice president, I told you I was a whistleblower. As a senior VP, I found violations to the license, told the NRC about it. They blew me off. I went to Congress, John Glenn, and I was sued for $1.5 million in a SLAP suit. That's a strategic litigation against public participation, which is something that you'll probably learn a lot about in the next couple months. John Glenn praised me, the head of the NRC praised me, and yet the NRC didn't lift a finger to protect my family and I from bankruptcy. So I don't have a lot of faith in the integrity of that organization. Specifics on Indian Point, why are we here? The reason we're here is because Holtec wanted to take the least expensive alternative and dump radioactive waste into the Hudson. We, Fairwinds, the company my wife founded, were approached by citizens who were opposed to that. And the industry statement was that there was no other alternative. And to the credit of some of the citizens here, they came to us and said, are there alternatives? And based on my experience, but based mainly on my wife working with the citizens group, she thought we could evaluate it, and in fact, I think we have a good alternative, which I'll talk about coming up. So based on 50 plus years of experience, I graduated in '71, 50 plus years of experience, I think there is an alternative to the inexpensive route of dumping it into the Hudson, and that's why I'm here today. The panel gave me a dozen really great questions. Some of the questions are quite long. I've got the format here in a question and answer format. Rather than read a 3-paragraph question, I'll try to summarize it in interest of time to get through the examples. But my thanks to the panel for some really well thought out questions. I'm going to start on slide 5. Slide 4, by the way, is a great explanation of the analysis Fairwinds has put forward. Based on what happened at Vermont Yankee, where they had unexpected tritium that they needed to store, they put tanks in the basement of the turbine building and collected it there. They didn't have town approval, they didn't have NRC approval because they already controlled the building. And based on that, I thought I was a member of the Vermont Public Oversight Panel. I thought that was a viable alternative here, and it certainly is worth pursuing. So question 1, I'm on 5 now. Would contaminated water from the spent fuel pools be processed through filters and demineralizers to remove a majority of radioactivity prior to being placed?
Recording in progress.
Well, prior to being placed in the building's storage tanks. The water in these tanks has already been filtered and demineralized several times, but it will continue to hold radioactivity because no filter and no demineralizer is entirely capable of removing the radioactivity. I would expect that before the water was transferred to the tanks that I proposed, there would be one other filtration and demineralization to capture whatever was stirred up from the contamination in the spent fuel pool and the associated tanks. I'm proposing storing the fuel in multiple tanks with an empty tank as a reserve and a berm around them in case there's leakage. And I propose they use the empty turbine building to do that based on what happened at Vermont Yankee when they used the turbine building without town approval and without NRC approval. The spare tank is an extra layer of protection, and also the berm is an extra layer of protection that I suggest we do. Once the tanks are filled, they're static. So some of the questions that the board presented suggested that flooding could occur, overfilling could occur. Once they're filled, they're filled. The tanks in question at other sites have overflowed because people were pumping water in, taking water out, which is different than what I'm proposing will happen at Indian Point. The vent line on a tank is designed so that as the volume of water goes up, the air can leave. But once the tank is static, you can put a diaphragm seal on that to prevent further evaporation, which is something I'll get back to in a couple of minutes. It's important to remember these tanks are static once they're filled. Okay, second question, Q2. I have suggested 30 samples. The proposal was 3. And why did I suggest 30 samples versus 3 as this water is being transferred over? The reason for that is tank recirculation may be effective if the liquid is really homogeneous. And I'm not sure the material is homogeneous. I think you're going to find contamination in the corners of the fuel pool or at the bottom of the tank. So as you turn over the tank, you're really not getting to the material at the bottom of the tank. You'll get gravity separation. So as the tank is drained, it is entirely foreseeable that the first batch of radiation coming through will be different than the middle and will certainly be different than the bottom, which is why I propose taking 30 samples. It's not a big deal. I mean, it's 2 days to the process and a couple $1,000 in analysis, and out of a $2 billion budget, you're just never going to see it. So 30 versus 3, it's because you can't assure yourselves that you're getting homogeneous mixing, and a good survey will likely detect that. Question 3, this was great, about a storage tank being overfilled, and there's also been examples where tanks at Fukushima were overfilled. How would the radioactively contaminated water be transferred into the storage tank that I propose being stored in the building? The Indian Point tank was in use for years, and it was used to fill, and it was not a static tank. They were filling it and discharging from it. Now I'm proposing 3 brand new tanks with brand new instrumentation, which minimizes but doesn't eliminate the possibility of overflowing. But considering the public interest in that process, for the day you're filling those tanks, it sure wouldn't hurt to have somebody standing there watching to make sure that the tanks didn't overflow. Separately, though, we get on to the other piece of that, is I'm proposing a berm around these tanks to collect what may overflow. As far as the part of the question suggested, what policies and procedures for transferring liquid, Holtec's already going to do that. They're already transferring waste from Unit 3 to Unit 2. So I believe the transfer procedures that are in place can be modified to pump it to the turbine building, which is my suggestion. So they had planned to transfer water anyway. I'm just changing where it's ultimately going. The goal is to protect the Hudson River, and having new tanks that are robust and a berm around them will avoid the possibility of something running across the floor, out the door, across the parking lot, and into the river. And that's really our goal, is to protect the river, from a commercial standpoint, from visitors to the facility as well. And, you know, it's a great tourist attraction. I loved sailing on it. The next question is a little bit longer, and probably the most important answer I've got here. How long would tritiated water be stored in the turbine building's tanks? I have two things I need to talk about first. First, all water contains tritium. In very low quantities. It's created by cosmic rays. So the river in the Hudson now has tritium in it. The tritium in the tanks in the building are tens of thousands of times more radioactive than that. And the second is, it's not just tritium in those tanks. Yes, there is tritium in the tank, but there's other isotopes as well. So to just call it tritiated water really is a misnomer. I am not advocating any specific duration. As far as I'm concerned, it's undefined and it's unspecified. But I believe that the immediate release is unwarranted, it's unnecessary, and it's unscientific. Now, I'm an engineer. I was taught that tritium couldn't get through the skin, and the beta particle was very weak, except I have no knowledge of that, except I was taught that in 1971. Now, if you look at what's happened since then, there's a lot of information coming out that suggests that tritium is not as benign as I was led to believe as an engineer. The misconceptions seem to have their root, like a lot of things in nuclear power, with the bomb program. The Scientific American did a great article about the history of the EPA tritium standards. And they quote a guy named David Coker at Oak Ridge, who said, as a health physicist who studied tritium for years, in the 1970s, the EPA did not rely on any health standards in setting its original standards. Instead, the EPA back-calculated acceptable levels of tritium in water from radiation exposure delivered in the already extant radionuclides from the weapons testing program. And then he has, this is important, this is the guy at Oak Ridge, the doctor at Oak Ridge. Coker says, it's not a health-based standard. It's based on what was easily achievable. So a couple of individuals who I really respect, Dr. Gordon Edwards in Montreal, Dr. Ian Fairley in the UK, Dr. Arjun Makhijani in Washington, D.C., and Dr. Tim Mousseau down in South Carolina, have all said, based on what we know now, we really need to take another look at tritium because it's not as benign as we think. And there's two other pieces, one of which is unique to the Hudson River, and that's this thing called synergistic toxicity. We know the Hudson has PCBs in it. They're not good for you. We know that tritium is not good for you. And the combination of those two have a synergistic effect. They don't add up, 1 + 1 is 2, they multiply. So this issue of synergistic toxicity for the Hudson is critical to my mindset about not releasing that stuff until we've done more scientific analysis. Dr. Makhijani wrote a phenomenal book on tritium that was published last year, and I'd advise reading it. I did. And he talks about how while the beta particle doesn't travel very far, if that tritium gets inside a cell, it can do a lot of damage. Okay, next question. On question 5. What would happen to tritiate water being stored in the turbine building's tanks? I think this was about the retention period. And as I said in the previous question, I don't know what that retention period should be. But I do know that releasing it now is unscientific and unwarranted. And what I suggest is that after scientists really look at the synergistic toxicity with with the PCBs in the Hudson and the organically bound tritium, and analyze that. At that point, we'll be able to, as a community, get together and say, hey, it's a no-brainer, we can release it, or my God, I'm glad we kept it on site, let's hold it longer. But that decision doesn't have to be made now. Let's wait for the science to catch up and store it until then. We need precise, reliable information and data that are available after the analysis. Question 6 is a long one, and I'm going to shorten it for time's sake. It gets back to the seismic issues. There's this thing called the DBE, a design basis earthquake, or an SSE, safe shutdown earthquake. And 3 times in nuclear history, nuclear plants have experienced an earthquake as bad or worse than what they were designed for. One was at North Anna, one was at Surrey, and one was at Perry. And the question is, what would happen to the tanks at Indian Point if a bigger earthquake, one it wasn't designed for, were to hit? And I looked at all 3 of those, and this was great research, by the way. I looked at all 3, and within a couple days, the turbine buildings had started up. The plants were continuing to generate electricity. So even when the design basis event hit, like the 6.0 that we heard earlier, the turbine buildings are robust enough to ride through it. Even at Fukushima, which had a 9 offshore, the turbine buildings remained intact. So I'm not worried about the structural integrity of the turbine buildings. Put that design basis event in context, though. The bridges over this river would likely be damaged or collapse. The infrastructure in towns would likely, either potable water or sewage water would likely fail. Gas lines would break and there'd be fires. It would not be a pleasant thing for the Hudson River Valley. But I do believe that the turbine building will ride through it. The quake at North Anna actually cracked the Washington Monument. That was 400 miles away. And yet, within a short period of time, the plant started back up. So I believe the turbine building is robust enough to withstand a design basis event without releasing the tritium tritiated water and other radioactivity that I'm proposing to be in it. There are other alternatives. I chose the turbine building because of the Vermont Yankee experience. That Vermont Yankee had stored tritium in its turbine building, didn't get town approval, didn't get NRC approval. However, I mean, if you want more robust buildings, the containment is there and the auxiliary building is there. But I think Holtec would like to be knocking those down. And once they've gutted the turbine hall, it's essentially about as big as a 10-court indoor tennis facility. It's a huge empty space, and put tankage in there didn't seem to me to be too difficult. But again, I'm not opposed to storing it in the containment or in the aux building or something like that. But the turbine building certainly seemed robust enough and was available. Question 7, again, great research, thank you, about unheated, freezing pipes in unheated buildings. How would insurance monitoring the level inside the tank be protected during cold water weather? First off, this is a static tank, so you really don't need level instrumentation screwed into the side of the tank. You could put somebody up the top with a pipe to drop it down every so often. But the goal is you're going to be looking around the berm to see if there's leakage. Holtec's got $2 billion. I think they could keep the heat on. That's answer number 1. But the failures were in unmonitored systems, like the Dresden example. I'm proposing once a day, you have a person on a shift go by and just look at the berm to see if there's any water. Next question, another one of these great research about problems at Oyster Creek that went undetected. The tanks in question 8 were not static. You know, they were pumping water in, taking water out. So having active height monitors, water volume monitors, was critical. And that's really not what we're experiencing here. It's a matter of, once that tank is full, once a day, look for leaks, and once every so often go in and measure the amount of freestanding, the amount of air above the water. Those kinds of things are much more simple than the examples quoted here. Question 9, Holtec has a dry storage technology used in the Ukraine. Is it a viable method for Indian Point? And I looked at it, and no, the Holtec storage technology in the Ukraine for dry storage is not really applicable for storing liquids. Question 10, we heard from another nuclear expert that there are risks, including evaporation and leaks. Can water be stored in tanks without evaporation or leaks? Once the proposed tanks are filled, they're going to be surrounded by a berm. The level doesn't fluctuate, and vents on a tank are designed to allow, when water is pumped in, the oxygen goes out. When water comes down, oxygen goes in. This is a static tank. You can put a diaphragm on the end of the vent to allow for some expansion and contraction due to temperature, but you're not going to have a significant amount of evaporation. So I don't believe evaporation will be significant. I discussed that a little bit later here. And also leakage, if there is any, in a new tank that's not being stressed by volume changes and it's unpressurized. In a tank of that nature, leakage, if it were to occur, would be minimal and would be caught in the berm, and either the tank could be sealed or the fluid could be transferred to the extra tank. And then, of course, it's not hard to put a water sensor at the bottom of the berm, so if you get flooding, you detect it between shifts. If you're there once a day and the leak occurs between shifts, a water monitor would alert the staff. If there is evaporation from the tank, what amount of tritium is released? I think evaporation may be about 2 gallons compared to 1.3 million gallons. So the issue of evaporation from a tank that has a diaphragm seal on it is about 1/1,000,000th of the issue of releasing it to the Hudson River. Question 12. When I wrote this, I was proposing new storage capability. I have not proposed reusing old tanks that are presently in use at Indian Point. I proposed putting 3 new tanks with a berm around them at Indian Point. And I've suggested they be in the turbine building because of the Vermont Yankee experience. But other buildings are also options. But I think Holtec wants to get rid of those buildings, the containment and the auxiliary building, because they're the ones where the radioactivity is highest. I understand that Riverkeeper may have suggested using an existing tank, and I haven't studied it, but if it's bermed to prevent any leakage from getting out, I guess I'd have to study it a little further, but it seems to be a viable alternative. But the key, my first goal is to keep it out of the Hudson until we get better science on tritium, organically bound tritium, and synergistic toxicity. Are you aware of any advancements in technology to remove tritium from water? Tritium is 10% heavier. Tritiated water is 10% heavier than water. Hence, they call it heavy water. And so because it's heavier, it boils at 214 instead of 212. So it is possible to distill water out from the tritiated water. It's awfully expensive. I'm aware of no other technology that is reasonably priced, hemp and things like that. If hemp works, the tritium just moved from the tank into the hemp, and now you've got, what are you going to do with the hemp? So it's not, none of those eliminate the tritium, but over time, you just have to wait for it to decay. So it's possible to separate out tritium. There are technologies available. It's awfully expensive, and most of them are not viable, not commercially viable, I guess I'd say. The Village of Buchanan has passed a resolution last year, on 14, expressing its intent not to approve any permit for on-site storage of tritiated water. Do you agree with the village's position should be respected? Does the NRC or local authorities take precedence? Well, I agree with the will of 500,000 people who signed the petition to stop Holtec. That should be respected. The town of Buchanan had benefited from low taxes for years, and until the situation is evaluated further, I don't believe that the precedent that the town of Buchanan suggests about passing a law is reasonable. Again, I chose this because it happened elsewhere. The turbine building at Vermont Yankee was used for storage of tritiated water in the past. Okay, I've never suggested outside storage. I think building new tanks outside invites the town and invites the NRC to get involved in the process. And considering my experience with the NRC and its close relationship with Holtec, I don't think you're going to have an honest broker at the NRC, and I think they in the town will go out of their way to stop new tankage outside. So that's why I chose an existing building with tankage inside the building. Given Holtec's long legislative history of manipulating the NRC to achieve favorable outcomes, I don't expect that a new facility, a new tank outdoors at Indian Point will ever be approved. Hence, if you keep it in a building that's already approved, that problem goes away. I think I'll just skip over 14.3 because I already discussed it. These never before things that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has given to Holtec are being reversed on decision within the circuits. But it's citizens. It's like the people in this room. It's citizens that are forcing the action. It's not the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I was one of the 5 members of the Vermont Yankee Oversight Panel for years. The panel approved Vermont Yankees' license to run for 20 more years, and I signed it. So I approved Vermont Yankee to run for 60 years, and it ultimately shut down well before that. But I approved that with appropriate upgrades, it was ready to go for another 20 years. I've been to Indian Point, I've looked at Indian Point, and I chose the alternative I've chosen to preclude any licensing ramifications by using the interior of a pre-existing building for new tanks, given that there's a precedent already in Vermont Yankee. Until we get this synergistic toxicity straightened out, the organic bound nature of it, and the overall tritium standards, which had no basis in science when they were originally proposed. Until those issues are addressed, I think it's unreasonable, unnecessary to release that water into the Hudson. My goal is to protect the Hudson's economics, its tourist industry, its agricultural viability, and its population and animal population as well, from something which has not been adequately analyzed by the NRC. And I want to thank, again, my wife for creating Fairwinds, and for the people in the community for seeking us out. 100 million, 500,000 signatures is a deeply meaningful value, and it gets not just Governor Hochul's attention, but the attention of all the people throughout the country. So thank you guys for what you've done. Thanks to the Oversight Board for having me here, and for all those advocates who seek to protect the Hudson River by inviting me here today.
Thank you, Mr. Gunderson. I'd like I'd like to open the floor for a few short questions or comments, and then I'm going to turn it to Bridget Freimeyer, and then there can be further discussion for both speakers after Bridget's presentation. But a few quick reactions to Arnie. Supervisor Becker, Heather.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you, Arnie, for your presentation. I've been consumed, the town board of Cortland's been consumed with this issue of the tritiated water. And as a physician, I know about tritium and radioactive and beta radiation. And I also read about what you talked about, that even though beta radiation cannot penetrate the skin, it can be absorbed through drinking. And the question is, the half-life within cells is not long, but it's probably long enough to cause genetic changes. And that's the issue. And I've said this before, there really is no safe, established lower limits of any form of radiation, whether it's X-ray, gamma, or beta in this case. Second of all, I think two of the points that I take from you that I agree with is, number one, it has no place in the river. The town board felt this way. We had our rally on May 6th. So many of the organizations, from Food and Water, Scenic Hudson, Riverkeeper, I know I'm missing dozens that were there, stood up, and we had every congressman from Manhattan to Albany supporting us, as well as multiple state senators and assembly members. When Senator Harcum and Assemblywoman Levenberg got the rules, the law changed so that they cannot dump into the river, that was a huge step. So now Holtec is going to challenge that law, and it'll go to the courts. I don't know how the court will opine. They're not going to look at it as a nuclear issue. They're not going to look at it as a safety issue. They're going to look at does a federal level of government supersede a local or state level? That's where the decision is going to come by. And that's not what this should be about. It's about the environment and the safety of the public. Which takes me to the next logical step, your healthy distrust of the NRC. The NRC is a government organization that responds to Congress. So the next step of all the activists, all the environmentalists, and the residents of the town and of the state, and all the other communities that are going to face decommissioning, is telling Congress to pass legislation to direct the NRC that they can't discharge nuclear material into waterways nationwide. We should take this and take it further than just our local community. And the final thing is, the storage on site is a reasonable alternative, but I don't want it to be the permanent solution, because that does hurt Buchanan, which is a major part of our town. So if it is stored on site, that's just somewhat better than keeping it in the pools, but it's not the permanent solution. And what you started your talk about, where we have to find technologies and get our engineers to find, to figure out what to do with tritium. Tritium comes from lithium, if my understanding, through the lithium nuclear process, and it's really just H3. It's similar to hydrogen. People are talking about converting it into water, turning it into peroxide, turning it into other materials, or just mixing it with silicates and burning it almost like concrete. So there are other solutions. So I think the points I want to make very quickly are we got to get the NRC to listen to Congress by making Congress aware of the issues nationwide, and this will force the industry to come up with other solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor?
I have many, many questions, so
And there will be more discussion after Bridget's presentation as
Absolutely.
well.
I just want to follow up on something Rich said, because I have been sitting at these meetings even before 2017, the NRC updates, and it's a consistent theme, consistently, NRC can't be trusted, NRC is this, they're in bed with the nuclear plants, and you know what? That's way above our pay grade here, way above, for anybody, any activist, any elected official here. So Richard, you are correct. If people feel that there is an issue with the NRC that needs to be addressed through other authorities, the president, the Congress, the Senate, whatever it is, because I consistently hear this. We can beat that drum forever. So if people feel that it's an issue, then we need to take it from here and go further with that. I do have some questions also. I heard what you said about the Village of Buchanan received tax dollars. Yes, we did. Yes, we did. And we also, I wasn't born yet, we also accepted that responsibility in the mid-50s when Con Edison purchased the property, went online in '62. Nobody knew what nuclear power was at the time. So we were given money to have a nuclear power plant in our backyard. And over the years, people understood more and more what nuclear power was, and what nuclear power can be going forward in the future. You see there's new technologies, all that. But you talk about the storage tanks. And one thing I was interested in, you said 3 storage tanks you assume would be 3. What are the sizes of those storage tanks? The sizes of the storage tanks that you're proposing?
Well, the Holtec originally said 1.3.
Yeah, we'll use
million gallons.
1.3.
So, divided
Yeah.
by 3, it's like a 400,000 gallon tank.
Okay, inside the turbine buildings?
Yes.
So I'm not sure if the Village of Buchanan would be able to regulate at that point, but I know the NRC would have some type of control over that. I'm sure they would have a voice in that. But with Vermont Yankee, you had mentioned, were you, when the original agreement was done, was that part of the original agreement that the water would be stored on site? Or was the original agreement there that it would be discharged into the river there?
Vermont Yankee was a zero liquid discharge
Okay,
plant.
yeah, I know it's a different plant from what we have.
So they were never allowed to discharge into the Connecticut River.
Okay, so in the end, how much tritium, how much water did they end up having?
Ultimately, they shipped it off-site. I don't remember.
But it's nowhere near
what the
1.3
total
million.
number was.
Bridget's going to get into that.
Okay, thank you very much. I will have more questions, but I definitely will have more questions. I have things written down, but I just wanted to ask those few. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Superintendent?
Thank you, Arnie, for the presentation. Just 2 quick questions. You had mentioned in your study that the storage the storage solution would survive an earthquake, but that gas pipelines might fail and might cause bigger issues. We do have a pipeline running underneath, probably very close to where we would be storing the tanks. Any consideration to that in your study?
I didn't take any consideration of the gas pipeline when I was looking at this.
Okay. And then the other question is, the footprint of Vermont Yankee, about how big, what is going on with Vermont Yankee right now? Is there development? Is there any reuse of the property, or is it sitting idle?
Vermont Yankee's being dismantled as we speak. It's a single unit, and it's a boiling water reactor versus these. Boiling water reactors are in general more contaminated than pressurized water reactors. It's a single unit. And they had a significant release on site back in 2010 that released not just tritium, but strontium-90, cobalt-60, cesium-137. So there's a groundwater wedge that's heading toward the river. And it's possible that the groundwater is also contaminated. So when I chose to compare to Zion was a pretty clean plant, and units 2 and 3 are pretty clean plants compared to the example of Unit 1, which was ancient and had its problems early on, or Vermont Yankee. So the best example, if you're going to do a head-to-head, was Zion 1 and 2 compared to Indian Point 2 and 3.
So let's talk about Zion. What's the status of Zion's property?
Zion's squeaky clean. It's
redeveloped?
The site is in the process of being turned over. The decommissioning, the dismantlement of the facility is done. The NRC is still evaluating the survey data to determine whether or not to release the site for public use.
Is any part of the goal to, yes, protect the Hudson, but is any part of the goal to reclaim the property for any particular type of use?
At Zion, yes. Yes, it was, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. John Sipos, and we're going to want to start Bridget's presentation to stay on schedule within the next couple of minutes. So, John, do you have a couple of quick?
Just a couple of clarifying questions. First of all, Mr. Gunderson, thank you for coming here tonight. Welcome to Westchester and to New York State. Thanks for coming down from Vermont. You started your presentation off by asking a question, are there alternatives? And you discussed that there were tanks in the basement at Vermont Yankee, and that was an alternative that you're building off of. Those tanks were in the turbine building, correct?
Yes.
And the turbine building today is demolished, correct?
Today?
Today,
I don't
April 2024.
I don't know what the status is, yeah.
Is the water still in the basement of the turbine building?
No, it's been...
So the water is gone from the basement of the turbine
Yes.
building? Okay. And just in prep for today, I went back and I looked at a video, I think that you prepared a year ago with Courtney Williams, runs roughly 20 minutes, and you described that there were 3 alternatives for Indian Point. One was releasing it in a controlled way to the Hudson River. The second was also a Vermont Yankee alternative, and you described it as that Vermont Yankee shipped the tritiated water via tanker trucks to a licensed facility down in Tennessee. Do you recall that statement?
I know that to be true, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you know that to be true, okay. And then the third option you proposed was to keep the keep the water in the fuel pools in Indian Point. I think that was your third option, recall that?
Yes, those are the
Okay.
3 options, yes.
And then at the end of that video, you said either the last 2 alternatives, and that would be trucking the water to the facility in Tennessee, or keeping the water in the fuel pool would be, I think the words you used are better than the controlled release to the river. Do you recall that?
I'm sure, yeah. If
Okay.
I had to rank them, dumping it into the river is far and away the
You're not
worst.
for that. You're not for dumping it into the river. I get that, right? Because you want to protect the river.
And the
Right.
indigenous communities here feel it's an environmental justice issue
Right.
to take that material and give it to somebody else, to give the contamination to
But
somebody else.
I want to come back but you did, in tiering them, or in a relative evaluation, you suggested that the Vermont Yankee approach, which was to truck it off-site or keeping it in the fuel pool, were the better 2 options. Is
Yes.
that correct? All right, thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thanks, John, and we're almost on schedule. We do want to reserve the last half hour of tonight's meeting for public statement hearing, and so Bridget, with that in mind, I know you have a number of slides to get through, and I want to thank you for doing some research on the Vermont Yankee option. So that was a good segue from John's questions. And thank you again to Mr. Gunderson. I just want to remind the audience that Bridget does work for the Department of Public Service, but she is not opining on any of these alternatives. She's presenting research that she conducted about the Vermont Yankee site. So with that as my introduction, Bridget, please proceed.
Thank you, Tom. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Bridget Freimeyer, and I am the Chief of Nuclear Affairs and Emergency Preparedness for the Department of Public Service. Tonight, I will be giving a presentation on another option for disposal of wastewater at Indian Point. Specifically, I will be discussing the possibility of shipping wastewater off-site during nuclear decommissioning. Before I begin, I would like to thank Elise Peterson from NYSERDA, who isn't here tonight, but she's usually sitting at this table, Cliff Chapin from the Department of Public Service, and Tony Lashinsky from Vermont's Department of Public Service. This presentation would not have come together or been nearly as informative without your assistance and patience with my many, at times seemingly endless questions. As an initial caveat, as Tom said, in discussing this option, I'm providing information to facilitate discussion on one possible option for disposal of wastewater at the Indian Point site. This presentation does not necessarily reflect the position of the Department of Public Service. Next slide, please. Oh, go back one. Fix that. Okay. All right, during this presentation, I will be discussing past decommissioning experience and information from both the Vermont Yankee plant and also from West Valley here in New York. Further, as is necessary with any option, there are many things to take into consideration, and we're going to be running through many of those as well. Next slide, please. First things first. Is this a feasible option? Yes. Has it been done successfully elsewhere? Also, yes. Has it been done successfully by Holtec? Not yet. Next slide, please. Vermont Yankee seems to be the topic of discussion tonight, so I'm glad that we have a few slides here describing a little bit more about the plant. And before I dive into what Vermont Yankee has done during decommissioning, here is some information summarizing the plant itself. The Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant is both similar and different from Indian Point. It is a boiling water reactor located in Vernon, Vermont, and was permanently shut down in 2014. The plant was bought by North Star in 2019. The right side column shows us that Vermont Yankee is quite a few years ahead of Indian Point's decommissioning process, with partial site release set for 2026. In the background of this slide, you'll see Vermont Yankee when it was operating. The Connecticut River is right in the foreground there. The reactor building, the biggest building pictured with the white stripe on the top, is in the foreground with the cooling towers to the left and the turbine and administrative buildings to the right. The picture on the right is an exciting look at where Vermont Yankee is in their decommissioning process. Next slide. This one has a lot of words. Stay with me here for a minute. It is impossible to talk about the decommissioning experience and wastewater shipping at Vermont Yankee without first discussing the 3 categories of wastewater at that site. When the Vermont Yankee reactor plant permanently shut down, the turbine building cooled and contracted, and numerous in-leakage paths developed. Groundwater leaked into the buildings and was contaminated. This water was labeled as contaminated intrusion water and can be seen on the slide in the yellow row. To deal with this groundwater intrusion, a diversion system was installed to prevent groundwater from entering the buildings. This water is collected by North Star prior to entering any Vermont Yankee building and is labeled in the first row in green, uncontaminated diversion water. Lastly, there is process water. This is the water that has been collected and stored from draining and decontamination of abandoned plant systems. For this category of water, I find it easiest to think of spent fuel pool water or the water that was used to cool the reactor plant when it was operating. And that's in the bottom row there. Okay, so those are the three categories. What did Vermont Yankee do with this water? Starting on the top, the uncontaminated diversion water was discharged to the Connecticut River with a permit from the state of Vermont. Both the contaminated intrusion water and the process water are shipped off-site for disposal. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, contaminated water, processed water, both shipped off-site at Vermont Yankee. Shipping wastewater off-site, and I believe this is what you just said, this was always a part of the plan. North Star knew this coming in when they purchased the plant in 2019. Vermont Yankee, this is per the NRC, Vermont Yankee is the only U.S. commercial decommissioning nuclear power plant to have performed this type of bulk liquid radioactive waste disposal and shipping. So, Vermont Yankee is shipping wastewater off-site, and they have been since the start of their decommissioning. But how much wastewater? The contaminated intrusion water, the state of Vermont just released a report in January 2024, and this report stated that North Star had shipped a total of 3.3 million gallons of contaminated intrusion water off-site. That's total so far. With regard to process water shipping, again, think spent fuel pool water, reactor plant water. They shipped 900,000 gallons of this water off-site in 2021 and 2022. Approximately 300,000 gallons of that was from the spent fuel pool. And in 2023, North Star shipped the last of its process water inventory, approximately 100,000 gallons, to waste control specialists in Texas. Like I said, this was the last process water inventory at the Vermont Yankee site. This means that the spent fuel pool is now empty, thereby facilitating further decommissioning and demolition of the reactor building. Next slide. Where does Vermont Yankee wastewater go, and how is it moved? Over the years, Vermont Yankee was owned by Entergy before it was bought by North Star. So that's when it says they're the different owners. I'm talking about Entergy and North Star. Different owners ship this water to different destinations. South Carolina, Tennessee, Idaho, and Texas. These owners used a combination of truck and tanker rail to ship the wastewater off-site. North Star currently uses tanker rail for wastewater shipping. And I love this picture, just to draw your attention to it real quick. What you'll see, and you can see the reactor building, which we already kind of discussed, but right in the foreground here, you can see the rail line that goes right onto the Vermont Yankee site. And then at the base of the reactor building, you can see two black tanker cars. Those kind of exemplify what North Star is using right now to ship the wastewater off-site. Next slide, Tom, please. All right. How much is Vermont Yankee spending on wastewater shipping? Unfortunately, there's no public record of exact shipping costs and how much North Star has spent on this endeavor. The Decommissioning Trust Fund annual reports submitted to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission do not separate out this information. We did find two separate newspaper articles from a Vermont nonprofit news outlet that provide some insight into cost. In 2017, an article referenced Vermont Yankees spending approximately $4 per gallon to truck contaminated water to Tennessee. Further, in 2018, another article references that Vermont Yankees spent $3.5 million to ship approximately almost 800,000 gallons of water off-site. And just for everyone, that 2018 article, if you do the math, that also kind of corresponds to $4 per gallon. And before we go on, it should be known that these wastewater shipping costs are drawn from the Vermont Yankee Decommissioning Trust Fund. Next slide, please. Thank you. Additional information on wastewater shipping was provided to us by New York Decommissioning Experience at West Valley. In 2020 and 2021, approximately 23,000 gallons of radioactive wastewater in a similar class to that we have at Indian Point was shipped via tanker truck off-site to the tune of $10 per gallon. This liquid was shipped by the West Valley Demonstration Project, the DOE, to Energy Solutions for treatment and disposal. Now, back to Indian Point. I'm very aware that I'm standing between you and public statement hearings, so I'm not going to go into all of this. You know Indian Point, you're familiar with its history and its decommissioning milestones. Next slide. As we've already stated tonight, Indian Point has approximately 1.3 million gallons of wastewater for disposal on site right now. This water is currently stored in several locations on site. It is important to note that Holtec has stated additional wastewater will be generated by upcoming decommissioning activities. So we should probably think of the 1.3 million gallons as the low end. Unlike Vermont Yankee, shipping wastewater off-site was not considered in Holtec's initial decommissioning plan. The licensee had planned to discharge this water to the Hudson River. However, in August of 2023, Governor Hochul signed a new law prohibiting the discharge of any radioactive substance into the Hudson River in connection with decommissioning a nuclear power plant. So, is it possible to ship wastewater from Indian Point? Yes, it is. As with any waste disposal option, there are several considerations to take into account when discussing the shipping of wastewater during decommissioning. I'll start with the regulatory considerations. If Holtec were to ship this water off-site, and they shipped it to either Tennessee or Texas facilities, these facilities are licensed for radiological waste disposal, so Holtec would not need or require prior NRC approvals. If Holtec chose to send this water to Idaho, that would require an additional NRC approval from the NRC. And I feel as though this is worth mentioning because typically when you talk about additional regulatory approvals, that means more time and it means more money. Transport considerations. Indian Point does not have a rail spur on site. What you saw in that picture of Vermont Yankee, Indian Point doesn't have that. So, as with other waste from decommissioning, trucks will need to be used to transport the waste to a transfer facility with rail and with applicable radiological permits. And as with any movement of liquid, there's always a risk of possible leaks or spills. Next slide. Fiscal considerations. From what we could gather, the estimated cost to ship wastewater is between $4 and $10 per gallon. With Indian Point's 1.3 million gallons that they have currently, this could cost the site between $5 and $13 million. I'll caveat that by saying that the $4 estimate is based on Vermont Yankee's 2017 and 2018 costs, and these do not account for subsequent inflation. Further, these estimates do not take into account the extra work of first trucking the Indian Point wastewater to rail. Lastly, there is a financial risk of a lengthy decommissioning timeline. Shipping the water off-site will almost certainly shorten the decommissioning timeline at Indian Point and thus alleviate this financial risk. Wastewater storage and disposal. If Holtec were to ship the wastewater off-site, on-site storage would no longer be a concern or an issue. If shipped off-site, this water would be evaporated or it would be solidified and buried at a licensed disposal facility. Lastly, licensee considerations. Holtec is the owner of Indian Point. Holtec may utilize any option permitted by state and federal law. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Bridget. Susan?
Thank you so much, Bridget. Really appreciate all your work on this.
Of course, Susan.
2 questions. What happens to the wastewater when it gets to the facilities?
Okay,
What do
great
they do with
question.
it? Do they discharge it into a river? Do they retain it on site? What do they do?
No, it's okay. I have better. Okay, so as of now, and again, I have to thank Elise Peterson because we did a lot of work looking into where this would go and what would happen to it. So there are three waste management companies that could be used in this situation. So we have waste control specialists. They're located in Texas. The Texas facility stated that once the water arrives, it would be offloaded into a storage tank, analyzed, and then fed into a process building to undergo solidification. The resulting material would then be used as landfill.
Landfill where?
In a RECRA cell. I'm sorry, everyone? In a RECRA cell, so in like a radiological facility. At a licensed radiological waste facility. Okay, so that's Texas. There's also another company called Energy Solutions. They have facilities in Utah and in Tennessee. If the water went to Utah, it would be very similar to what I just described in Texas, solidification. If it went to Tennessee, it would go to an evaporation plant. Lastly is Idaho. And at this facility, the water would either be used as process water or evaporated in a retention pond.
Thank you. One more question. Would you anticipate the water from Indian Point would be considered Class A when shipped?
I asked that question multiple times. And yes, Class A was the answer every time.
Thank you, Bridget.
Yes.
Assemblywoman Levenberg.
Thank you, and thanks so much for that presentation, Bridget. How many trucks, maybe, I don't know if you know this, but how many trucks are already transporting Class A material off-site, or any other class for that matter, from Indian Point?
I can't give you an answer on that right now. I'm sure we could get that information from you.
Right. And just in terms of the work that's already been done, do we know if there have been any leaks or spills or any accidents or anything else from any of the trucking off-site to date from the decommissioning process? Because I know that there have been plenty of trucks that have transported materials off-site.
Are you asking this specifically to Indian Point, or are you asking the question specific to the wastewater shipping that's been done historically in the commercial nuclear industry?
Well, since you asked, I'm now asking it about both.
Okay. I'm glad.
Okay.
So at Indian Point, I don't believe that they've shipped any wastewater off-site, and because of that, there have been no leaks or spills. And we did an in-depth look to try to find any issues with this wastewater, and there was nothing public that we could find.
From the Vermont Yankee experience.
From Vermont Yankee.
From Vermont Yankee, okay.
Yes.
Okay. I think that was my only question. I don't know if I'm allowed to go back and ask a question for Arnie, but I did
Of
have
course.
another question. Okay. Just in terms of,
Arnie, for you.
there was, I think that Holtec had said that a couple of the options that you mentioned were not possible because of the turbine building being needed to move water during the decommissioning process. I didn't know if you wanted to comment on that, and also how long it would take, based on your estimation, to actually build those storage tanks in the turbine building.
The transferring it between the units is a matter of a day or two. To pump 1 million gallons is not a, or 500,000 gallons from one unit to the other, is a short duration project. The construction of the tanks is, a couple months after the building has been gutted, because all of the material inside that facility is clean and is sold as scrap. So once the building's gutted, it's a matter of leveling the floor, building the tank, and putting the berms in.
Dana, my recollection, and I know on advice of counsel, you're not allowed to discuss this, so if you can clarify, please join us at the mic, but my recollection from the previous discussions was that Holtec was contending that the systems that are currently used to treat the wastewater, store it in the tank that is then used to hold the treated wastewater, and then to pump it into the discharge canal, are all part of systems that would be decommissioned. If they didn't have, they can't take out those systems that are within other components that would need to be decommissioned. So if Mr. Gunderson's approach of a short-term or shorter-term storage in that scenario, where further research would be conducted, and if there were a time in the multiple-year time frame when the scientific consensus under his suggestion said, yeah, we can go back to the original plan, treat and release, the systems that contain all of the water pumping and get it to the discharge canal may not be intact. Frank, is that what you've previously reported?
No, but Mr. Gooderson's proposal is to pre-treat the water before you put it in the storage tanks. So if you pre-treated all the water, then you wouldn't have to retain all of that stuff.
But there's pumping equipment that takes it from that tank after treatment and gets it to the discharge canal, and there's pumping water for dilution that occurs. And so what about those systems?
Right, they wouldn't have to retain the treatment systems, but they'd have to get a way to take it to the discharge canal if they were, I assume they would just build a new system for that. At the time of discharge, that's what we're going to do.
Okay, so theoretically, could, and then this is one more question, it's sort of for Frank, I guess. You had mentioned about the areas of concern, and you sort of mentioned that the units 1 and 2, once removed, underneath those 2 units would be areas of concern. Is that, and you sort of mentioned like different levels of concern, is that, I mean, is that something that would theoretically make it difficult to put another commercial venture on top of that? I'm just curious. And I know that we talked a little bit about Zion and that, I just don't.
Maybe just explain what an area of concern is and the relevance of that term. Would that be helpful?
Sure.
An area of concern is anything that's been identified over the course of the last 60 years where a spill occurred.
Spill of anything of concern, like petroleum or
Right, but he was saying under units 1 and 2, I'm not thinking that that's petroleum concern there, I don't know what it is.
So basically, anything on the nuke side of the plant.
Right.
Right, just try to keep it at a simple level. We need to remove all the components. We need to remove everything inside of every building needs to get removed. All the hazards need to be removed, all the major components need to be removed, then we remove the building. Now you're left with the foundation. underneath that foundation, we need to remove the foundation, and then we need to sample everything to make sure that nothing is there. That's part of, I'm going to say DER 10. It's a state requirement, it's also a federal requirement. Feds require us to get to 25 MR. If you stand in one spot for 1 year, you'll never get more. State requires 10. So that's kind of all the same thing. It'll all be in the written plan. It's all part of our partial site release plan. It's not specifically a listed AOC, but it's treated almost the same. AOCs are little spots where we've had history of mostly oil spills that we're treating, or any kind of a contaminant. But again, I don't have the table of them or where they are.
Sure.
But ultimately, no matter what you're looking at, that block of 35 acres of all the congested buildings, once they're all cleared, they would need to be remediated. And it's basically the same process as an AOC. It needs to go through every soil sample, soil bores, drilling wells, all of that needs to get done, and the remediation if you find anything.
And you actually just reminded me that the asphyxia pads, there's some plan to actually move that spent fuel, the dry casks, at some point. Is that right? Is that correct?
Well, that's the DOE's responsibility.
Okay, I got it. But was that supposed to be moved to a Holtec site or something? No.
The DOE, the federal government hasn't determined where that location will be.
Okay. And speaking, you also mentioned that the DOE hasn't done any movement of anything yet, and you were expecting that they might have done it at some point? Like, where are they? Why haven't they moved this?
So
I think you mentioned that.
maybe I could hop in on
Okay.
that.
Okay.
When the federal government licensed the Indian Point reactors, it told the community, the host community, that the spent nuclear fuel would not be stored on the site, and that is in an environmental impact statement, and that is a statement by the Atomic Energy Commission. The United States Department of Energy is the ultimate recipient and custodian of the spent nuclear fuel. It goes back to the federal government. However, the Department of Energy, since 1974, has not identified, constructed, or received a permit for the permanent disposal of spent nuclear fuel. So that is why we have the ISFC at Indian Point and at 70 other reactor sites across the country. And the waste is accumulating there. There is no Yucca for the fuel, Yucca Mountain in Nevada. And it is not yet clear when, choosing my words carefully, I'm going to say when, the United States Department of Energy will take title and control and custody of that. So in the Holtec decommissioning plan, they note that, as does every other reactor owner in the country. But this is if you want to call it a donut hole on the part of the United States Department of Energy. They don't have a place for the waste that Congress has assigned them to take.
But interestingly, the Department of Energy is actively studying and working on the transport plan when they do have a place to go. And they did come and give a presentation to us. I think it was before you joined the board. And so it's in our archives, and I think it's worth reviewing their presentation to us just for your information.
They actually just published the report.
Sorry?
Yeah, the updated report just came out recently from their many visits across the country.
Good. So we'll circulate that to the DOB.
Great. Okay.
I want to move on to, I'm sorry, Richard, the public signed up, they pre-registered, they came. I'm sorry, Senator Harcum, and then I have a brief question for Arnie as well for clarification, but go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. I'm not going to be long. Thank you, Bridget, for a very interesting presentation. John, I applaud your optimism by saying when. After 60 years, I'm more in the if category, but that's just a personal.
You know, as a lawyer, I have to be careful.
Pete, I think your microphone is turned off.
Are we off?
You are off, yeah.
We are off? All right. Where there's a will, there's a way. Thank you very much. Quick question on the finances, and you kind of caveated that with the, it was really confidential information, and you cobbled together from different sources. So I appreciate where you're coming from. One of the points you made is, yes, this is technically feasible. 2, you sort of isolated a window of costs. Now that's just one ramification, right? Or the costs, and they're the trucking emissions, and there are other things, qualitative factors and quantitative factors. But I think it would be interesting to sort of see if we could quantify the cost differential between the methodology that you discussed, the methodology that Arnie's talking about, and I don't mean to be facetious when I say this, or 8 years of litigation, that all of these things have a time implication, a cost implication, and I think it would just be really interesting if we could put together a matrix of qualitative and quantitative factors dealing with all of the 3 options. So, thank you.
Thanks, Senator. That's a good suggestion. I have a quick clarification question for Mr. Gunderson. You mentioned the concern about synergistic toxicity, and I'm interested in that. I believe I understand what that is, and for the viewing public, it is 2 contaminants of concern. Each has potential health consequences, but when combined, either one or both end up having worse health consequences, right? And you mentioned the potential concern with tritium interacting with PCBs, and I want to clarify whether that is based on any research you've done that showed or studied that potential synergistic toxicity, or is it more of a precautionary principle that you don't know, it hasn't been looked at, and we should know the answer?
I looked up synergistic toxicity / tritium, and there's no research on that. I did talk to Dr. Arjun Makasani about it, and PCB molecule has a bunch of hydrogens that could easily be replaced by a tritium molecule. So the amplification of the effect of PCBs with tritium is entirely feasible. But I'm 75 years old and working alone, so no, I don't have the research lab to do that.
Thanks for the clarification.
Just 2 quick follow-ups, Mr. Gunderson. I was looking at a video, it was a different video actually, from last fall. This is the one with the white bookshelves in the background. And I think I jotted down that you said for on-site storage that they're, quote, may start to leak over time, close quote. Do you recall that?
I didn't prep by watching the old ones. If you wrote it down, I believe you.
Okay.
Which is why I wanted the berm.
Okay.
The goal is to have that backup.
Just wanted to confirm that. Just one other point. You mentioned the seismic integrity of the turbine building. I think you're aware of a long-standing NRC study for plants in the central and eastern United States. It's called Generic Safety Issue 199, and it goes back to the United States Geological Survey identifying increased seismic hazard risks for the eastern plants. Do you recall that?
I know that Entergy was able to skate by those standards for decades. So yes, there is a body of scientific evidence that suggests earthquakes may be worse than what the NRC has suggested they could be.
For the eastern plants, including in the Indian Point site, right?
Oh, I would put every plant in that category, not just the eastern plants.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to do, we're about 10 minutes behind, so I'm going to ask the DOB to stick 10 minutes late, so we can do 30 full minutes of public statement hearing. And I'm going to turn it over to Tom to please run the show on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And I'll ask the first few individuals to come line up or be prepared. Jacqueline Drexler, Tina Volz-Bongar, and Susan Shapiro will begin with you in that order. Just as a reminder, speakers will be cut off after 3 minutes. We're going to try getting to as many as we can in the 30-minute period we have allotted. And we're going to try out a feature tonight. There's going to be a timer on the screen. Please keep an eye on it. I will mention at 30 seconds remaining to begin wrapping up your remarks. So with that, you may begin.
I don't think I can keep an eye on the screen and on my words, so I'll rely on you to do that. So my name is Jackie Drexler. I live in Valley Cottage, New York. Thank you to the members of the DOB for tonight's meeting. Thank you to Governor Hochul for signing the Save the Hudson bill. The community stands behind you, Governor Hochul, and New York State in defending the Save the Hudson bill. Thank you to Arnie Gunderson for coming to present on safe on-site storage as a potential option, and thank you to Bridget as well for your presentation. I personally and others, many others, do not believe that transportation is a viable or safe option. However, tonight, I speak words from Chief Dwayne Perry of the Munsee Ramapo Lenape Nation, who is also a board member of Riverkeeper. I quote, "We are water protectors, protectors of rivers. Holtec has a job to do and must do it well. They must not toxify our river, the river that flows both ways, the Hudson River. We must protect our river for future generations. What is proposed is environmental murder, which creates genetic and generational damage with serious health consequences for us, our children, and for future generations. Are we, more interested in having a healthy future with healthy children, or more interested in Holtec putting profits before people? Not storing this radioactive wastewater and radioactive waste in general seems to be a fiscal opportunity for Holtec. Is Holtec's profit margin more important than our future? This must be resolved in a manner that allows safe decommissioning with the least harm. The other option that is on the agenda tonight, transporting by tanker and rail, transporting this waste only offers dangers to the communities that these transports go through. A final thought, a prayer. We are all responsible for all air, water, earth, for all plant life, aquatic life, wildlife, bird and insect life, and for human life, to survive and to have good and healthy lives for all generations to come," end quote. And a final thought from me. I insist that a citizens and experts group be created in light of so many environmental threats, and because this is basically a nuclear waste dump where there is nowhere to actually move the casks, we must create a panel, a group dedicated to the safety of the community and to our environment. I think it needs to be similar to the Vermont Yankee panel that Mr. Gunderson chaired. I also think that it was wonderful that before Indian Point was built, there was quite an environmental study, a 20-mile radius study of the soil, air, water, and animals, etc. I believe there should be a 60-year review, a new environmental study, to see what has changed and what has happened in the intervening 60 years.
That's
so
time.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you. Tina Volz-Bongar, followed by Susan Shapiro and Herschel Spector.
So I really want to thank the Decommissioning Oversight Board for bringing Mr. Gunderson here. It's wonderful that we have an independent expert testifying to this board, and so I thank you profusely for that. So my question would be, since we have the presence of an independent expert here, is there anything that you've heard tonight that you think is really important for the community to look at and to pursue, Mr. Gunderson?
Yeah, there were two things. First was the issue of evaporation. Evaporating the spent fuel pool water. There's another element in there called technetium-99. Technetium-99 hooks up with oxygen and makes an oxide which volatilizes at 104 degrees. So that if you evaporate this fuel pool water and there's Tech-99 in it, you're likely to also volatilize the Tech-99 with the tritium. So it's it's a problem that also needs to be evaluated when you look at evaporation. One real quick thing, the Hudson River flows by the plant and magically gets diverted with about 80,000 gallons of water get taken from the Hudson River. It gets relabeled as the circulating water. That was the water that cooled the plant back when it needed cooling. It doesn't need cooling now, but the circulating water goes by the plant, and somehow it's no longer the Hudson River. And Holtec will take the 70,000 gallons of circulating water, which is essentially the Hudson River, and dump into it about 150 gallons of tritiated water from the fuel pool, and somehow claim that they're not contaminating the Hudson River. The circulating water system is not safety related, so that the NRC has no jurisdiction over the circulating water system, which I think is an important thing going forward.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gunderson.
Susan Shapiro?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Susan Shapiro. First of all, I want to say this idea of shipping tritium off-site is a total red herring. While we have the spent fuel cast, the 76 or so spent fuel cast, this site is not being returned to any other use. So let's be realistic about this. Right now, Holtec has decided that instead of working with us, they're going to sue, and they're going to delay for 8 years. They're going to sue for the right to pollute the Hudson River. That's what they're asking for in this litigation. They may very well be using our money for that lawsuit. So their claim that they're going to delay is just a ploy. So I don't think we should be moved by that. And Holtec has really shown its hand, that they don't really care about this region or the people here. Definitely by their cursory inspection after the earthquake, they just did a visual inspection. Enbridge, the pipeline people, actually could do tests based on pressure, and they put a camera through. But Holtec's casts are designed so they cannot be inspected. We currently have casts that can never be inspected, so we don't know the integrity of what happened with the spent fuel inside those casts, and nor can we ever. So, yes, and the NRC approved those casts, and the NRC, as have been said here tonight by many people, is not doing their job, nor, as you said, the donut hole, Mr. Sipos. It's more like a black hole for nuclear waste. There is no place that the federal government has figured out after 70 years what to do with this nuclear waste. So what's happening? The state is being held responsible. We here, the people in the state, are being held responsible. So one of the things I'd like to ask is that you bring back to the governor that the state needs to do comprehensive, real-time monitoring, not just the remaining 4 monitors around the plant, but we need real-time monitoring that the state runs independently and not relying on Holtec to do it. I also think that the state should be petitioning the DOE to give the state the funds that have been that they are giving to reactor owners, because that lawsuit has already been won. That if you're holding spent fuel on your property, which is the state's property, that this waste is now standing on. We are now, Indian Point now is a nuclear waste, maybe it's an interim dump, or maybe it's a permanent dump, but right now that waste isn't going anywhere. It has nowhere to go. So that's what I'm asking, is that we now, as the state, take on this role, because we know it's happening. You know, we can't keep putting blinders on and saying there's going to be a solution. There is no solution. The only solution is for us to use the best technology available to keep this waste as safely away from human and people and the environment. And so it's really our turn as a state to do this.
Thank you.
Thank you. And New York State has the right to do this. So please, I ask, can I just ask one last question? I do not know why there's not been a discussion about moving the tritium all into the spent fuel pool 3. So at least if we need a hot cell, we'll still have a hot cell. Why not get it out of the leaking pool, which is 2, and put it into spent fuel 3 and store it there until
Ms. Shapiro?
There's a solution.
Thank you. Herschel Spector, followed by Nancy Van and Courtney Williams. Is Mr. Spector here? Oh, thank you.
Good evening. I'm Herschel Spector. I'm a professional engineer in the state of New York. I've been coming to these meetings on and off for quite a while, and what I always come away with is that we're not dealing with a fundamental issue, and the fundamental issue is the fear of radiation. I've come to meetings, and let me say, if people are afraid, and many of the people here have expressed this to me, the natural result of that is resentment and distrust. So I think one of the things I decided to do between the last time I came and tonight was to try to close the gap in terms of knowledge. And I'm not a radiation specialist. So I'm going to try. And forgive me, I'm not perfect. But when I first thought about it, I thought about a person like a cook doing things which we all done, and he cuts himself. But he knows, like we all know, that within a short time, you'll get healed. The body repairs itself. That's the truth that we all know. But what if the cook had really messed up and cut his wrist? He could possibly bleed to death. So what is really important is, are we dealing with a small cut radiologically or a big cut? Well, I'm going to tell you, we're dealing with a very small cut. And the issues that we're talking about are not like radiation from a nuclear bomb, like Hiroshima or Nagasaki. It's not like the radiation from an accident, like Chernobyl or Fukushima or 3 Mile Island. It's much smaller. These are low-level wastes and low radiation levels. What do we know about them? Well, actually, what we do know is that we can't find any discernible radiation health effects at low doses. It shocks people. There are none after Chernobyl. They can't find them after all these years. What we also know is that there are locations on this earth, like in Iran, which the radiation levels is 70 times higher than what it is for background here. No increase in health effects.
30 seconds.
So what we really need, I think, is missing is let's get somebody down here, perhaps the NRC or DOE, who knows about radiation, who then can say, here's our standards, and here's why you're protected. We don't have that now, but until you do that, you're going to have fear and distrust and anger. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Van, followed by Courtney Williams and James Rogolski.
Hi, I'm Nancy Van, and I live in Peekskill, approximately 2.8 miles as the crow flies from Indian Point. Recently, on April 18th, the New York Times ran an article called The Fantasy of Reviving Nuclear Energy. What we've heard here tonight about shipping this water off to Texas, I would call the fantasy of getting rid of nuclear reactions or nuclear dangers here. In March of 2023, the state of New Mexico passed legislation blocking Holtec from establishing a consolidated interim storage in the state of New Mexico. Despite that, on May 9th, 2023, Holtec received a license from the NRC for interim storage. However, on March 27th, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals vacated Holtec's license. They said that the NRC doesn't have the ability to license that type of storage facility, and that was the same thing that happened for a comparable Texas storage facility, where in August 2023, the DC court said that the NRC could not grant licenses for storing nuclear waste in Texas. We are not going to be able to ship this waste to Texas. We're not going to be able to ship the water to Texas. These particular lawsuits, I'm a retired Wall Street lawyer, and I've looked at these lawsuits. They are in very much in coordination with the current Supreme Court rulings that limit the ability of government agencies to do things which they haven't been specifically permitted to do
30
by
seconds.
Congress. So Congress, when we hear that Congress has to act to stop this, well, Congress hasn't acted, so we can't do this. It's exactly the opposite. There's no place that we're going to be able to ship this water to. We need to deal with that fact. Thank you.
Thank you. Courtney Williams?
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak and for this meeting. I've got a few different things, and then maybe at the end of my 3 minutes, folks can answer. Not mentioned at this meeting so far, school monitoring. Parents had asked for that in September. We still have nothing. I would ask that the state do what they can to expedite things, because we're supposed to have this at the start of the school year. It's now the end of the school year. We have nothing. Nancy Van brought up the findings. Holtec's appeal was lost. They can't send the spent fuel anywhere. Well, how does that impact? Because they've been telling us all along they're going to ship it off, change federal law, et cetera, et cetera. None of that's happened. In terms of the synergistic effects that Mr. Gunderson brought up, off the top of my head, I can think of Indian Point, which has been leaking not just little cuts kinds of radiation into groundwater for decades. The gas pipelines, we have Wheelabrator, the largest industrial air polluter in the county. We have the gypsum plant that sprinkles us with gypsum dust on a nightly basis. The BASF chemical plant, we have the Hudson River full of PCBs, and the Bowline fracked gas power plant on the other side of the river, and those are just what I could think of off the top of my head, all within less than 5 miles of Indian Point, so we can synergize that. I did mention to Mr. Spector, who thinks that the National Academies of Science is some kind of Rockefeller conspiracy, but they did put out a report saying we have not done enough to study low-level radiation, so I'm looking at a headline right now. U.S. needs new $100 million research program to study health effects of exposure to low doses of radiation, says new report. And then one thing that I was totally flabbergasted by is the considerations for the report on transporting the wastewater. Missing from the list, we had transport, we had fiscal, we had wastewater storage and disposal, we had licensee. You know what wasn't on the list? Residents, either the ones that live here or the schmucks that get stuck with whatever gets shipped to Tennessee. Also not on the list, public health and safety. So if we're going to make the matrix that Senator Harkin brought up, maybe we can consider like those of us that live here and the health impacts of,
30 seconds.
Of this. So that's what I got.
Thank you. Next is James Rodolsky, followed by Susanna Glidden and Kim Frashcheck.
None of my things are going to be answered?
We will answer every question that's posed, as we always do, in our follow-up to the meetings.
Oh, so no discussion or answers now on school
It's a public statement hearing. On the school monitoring, we can bring that to the June meeting, and we can, I assume you can have communications with the school that has their contract as well. And just one point of clarification, the original urgency around that was prior to the schedule change on decommissioning, when heavy demolition was going to be commencing. And the concern around the monitoring was around the heavy demolition, and the plan was to get the monitoring in place before that occurred. The state contracted a monitoring contract. We're not commencing that until heavy decommissioning goes forward.
So we don't have any baseline data?
The baseline data, if you recall, we agreed to take the $500,000 that was originally for monitoring in response to the community concerns around getting baseline data. We said the state will pay for the contract that we already secured and procured for the monitoring, and will give the $500,000 to the school district to secure a separate contract to do baseline assessment at BV and to do further community monitoring that they agreed to do in partnership with the community. So I don't know if the superintendent wants to add anything to this, but we can provide a fuller presentation at the June meeting on the agenda.
Sure. Courtney, as we discussed before, we do have a meeting with the vendor for both the equipment and also with the baseline that's upcoming, and I did invite the DEC as well. I think I did that just before I came this evening. In approximately on April 30th, we'll have that meeting.
Sorry about that.
You may begin.
Thank you. Members of the Indian Point Decommissioning Oversight Board, thank you for having me. My name is James Rogalski. I'm a 20-year veteran English teacher at Hendrick Hudson High School, and I am the president of the Hendrick Hudson Education Association, the 250-plus member teachers union that serves the students and community of the Hendrick Hudson School District. Along with the secretaries, custodians, teachers' aides, and administrators, over 400 people have a career here. I come today to ask for the board's consideration for my members and the school district's future. Currently, the district faces possible financial peril. Indian Point provided approximately 30% of the district's budget. Holtec, in its stead, is only providing a small fraction of that with their pilot payments. Because of this, the district is currently being held afloat by using funds from the New York State Cessation Fund, and at $60 million, it made up for just 2 years' worth of Indian Point revenue. And the district's also using its local fund balance. These two funds are set to run dry in about 5 years. During these next 5 years, the district must raise taxes, cut services and programs, or both, to remain solvent. This year, the tax levy for the community was approximately $50 million. According to the district's business manager's calculations, that number must rise to approximately $75 million in that 5-year span, a 50% increase. This will require multiple years of tax levy increases over the New York State tax cap and will be difficult and contentious, if even possible. And this is all happening on the heels of COVID's insidious effect on schools. Esteemed colleagues of mine have already left HenHUD, and others are currently applying for work elsewhere. Perhaps a longer-term financial plan to help create a soft landing is in order. The HHEA would like the opportunity to meet with you and other stakeholders to help work to secure HenHUD's future. To best serve the community, our schools need stability. Financial insecurity is the antithesis of that. Indian Point's reactors once thrummed with prosperity, helping to provide opportunity for our local community.
30 seconds.
We bared the risk to reap the reward. Now its spent concrete casks of radioactive fuel represent an albatross for Buchanan and the Hendrick Hudson School District. The risk is still present, and the future is now uncertain. I believe that should be rectified. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Susanna Glidden, followed by Kim Fratchek and Marilyn Ellie.
Good evening. United for Clean Energy and the Stop Holtec Coalition have always promoted not sending our nuclear waste to other communities, which also endangers the states through which it passes, but to take care of it ourselves where it was generated. This doesn't mean dumping it into and harming the Hudson River with, as Arnie explained, synergistic toxicity, combining a huge load of spent fuel pool wastewater with PCBs. The river provides drinking water for towns, habitat for living species, subsistence fishing, and is the mainstay for tourism and the economy. As Arnie Gunderson clearly explains, it can easily and safely be stored inside tanks in a turbine building, not requiring a permit. testing the groundwater that has tritium, and testing the fuel pool water by an independent lab, as Arnie recommends, is also very important to have the sampling taken correctly and the extra contaminants revealed beyond what the New York State lab tests for. If alarming sea rise in the future is taken into consideration, store the tanks on the roof of the tallest turbine building, or build a second story to enclose them. Let's be realistic and acknowledge that the country will never come to agreement on a permanent or temporary storage area for the spent fuel rods that would endanger indigenous people, communities, and the environment. To avoid catastrophe of sea rise reaching Indian Point stored fuel rods, transfer the rods into safer casks, create higher ground pads on site, and move the stored fuel rods to them. Finance it by cutting down on the military, Pentagon, defense, weapon manufacturer budget, and tax the rich. Compensate the host town, Buchanan, generously to replenish their tax base. It is way past time to prevent corporations from ruining our environment, ruining our health and our lives with their waste. May New York State prevail over Holtec's behavior to avoid responsible and easy on-site storage. Let us get on with our lives and resolve these matters and not allow delay. Let it set precedent for other nuclear plants. Let the people and environment prevail over corporate bottom line profit incentive, and may it be so. Thank you.
Is Kim Fratchek here?
No. She might be online.
Marilyn Ellie? I'll check.
Maryland's here.
Thank you to the board for this meeting and for your oversight, and I'll get back to oversight later, of Indian Point. There have been people concerned with Indian Point, with what it would do to the community since the 50s. It's not a new thing for, I will say, it was a small minority, but there are those of us who have advocated against Indian Point since then. I stand on the shoulders of many who have gone before. Al Warren was one who carried a petition saying, do not allow this plant to come into my town. He lived in Buchanan. And what happened is what happened in all the decades since. People said, we need the jobs, we need the money. And Al was blown aside. And I, as one who's been working on this for the last 35 years, understand that because I experienced a lot of it myself. And it's been a difficult struggle. Finally, the plant is closed, and that's a good thing, and here we are, looking at what to do with the remains, which were very visible from the very beginning. This is not a shock or a surprise to those of us who have looked at it and followed the development and come to this board, come to these meetings to talk and say, look at this. I was shocked and surprised when the town actually hired somebody to say, oh, how can we use the property at Indian Point, and got back things about condos and river walks and things like that. And that was despite the fact that many of us had stood before here and said, look at what you have. Look at how deadly for how long it is. So I don't need to go on about that, but what I do want to bring to this point is that I think what's happening with the tritiated water is just a foretaste, a forecast of what's going to happen with the spent fuel pools. The federal government lied. They said they would take it away and it wouldn't be a problem. Well, it was a lie.
30 seconds.
And not only that, but there is no plan B. And I'm really, as the mayor of Buchanan is tired of hearing people beat up on the NRC, I'm tired of hearing that, oh, that's another route you have to take. There is no other way to reach the NRC. It's not possible. You cannot do anything about them because they are a fortified institution. We can talk about that if you want to,
That's
but not
time, ma'am.
now. So my time is up. What I want to say and what I want to remind you about
Mayor.
is that the NRC is, it's very apparent tonight, corrupted by its ties to
Ms.
the
Ellie?
industry, and it cannot be changed by the people in this room, and there is no way to do that. And I just want to leave with you the fact that
Ms. Ellie, we're over time.
you are the Decommissioning Oversight Board. You're not an advisory board. I know what Tom says, and I hear you. I hear you when you're saying that, and you've got a lot of bureaucratic regulations you have to follow, but I just want to remind you about your name. You are the Decommissioning Oversight Board. And just as tritiated water needs to be maintained on site,
Ms. Ellie?
so does so does the high-level radiation waste. Thank you. I'm sorry I went over.
I'm just going to
Our final two speakers this evening will be Nate.
One second. Marilyn, I don't care if you beat up on the NRC, but all I wanted to say is that if we need to remedy it, if there's an issue, if there's a problem, it's not done here. We need to take it more on a federal level with our elected officials. That's all I'm saying.
Well,
You know.
it starts here.
Okay.
Let's be clear
Let's
on
keep
that. It starts
keep going. We have two more speakers.
Our final two speakers this evening will be Nathan Plummer and Tracy Brown. Nathan Plummer, are you with us still this evening?
No. Next.
All right, Tracy Brown. And while Tracy's coming up, I'm aware there's some other online individuals who are hoping to speak. We'll provide other opportunities for you after Ms. Brown. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to the Decommissioning Board for bringing Arnie Gunderson, and thank you for coming and doing this work and presenting your expert opinion for all of us. Much appreciated. I'm Tracy Brown. I'm the Hudson River Keeper. River Keeper is dedicated to protecting the Hudson River from source to sea and safeguarding drinking water. We've been a leader in addressing the many environmental impacts of Indian Point for decades throughout its operation, into its closure, and we're proud members of the DOB. Riverkeeper is appalled by Holtec's disingenuous tactics to blame the Save the Hudson Act for the proposed 5-year delay in the decommissioning timeline. When it is clear that Holtec itself artificially has manufactured the circumstances for the delay in challenging this law that has such overwhelming public support and refusing to consider on-site storage for the tritiated water. We have spent enough time on this issue, and New York has made it clear that a discharge into the Hudson is not acceptable for our communities. Decommissioning is a complex process, and we must move on to the many other issues still outstanding. Starting with the contaminated radioactive groundwater that is currently already migrating into the Hudson River, that has been putting the river and nearby communities at risk for decades. DEC and Holtec must prioritize addressing this groundwater. Riverkeeper strongly calls on Holtec to keep the decommissioning process moving forward and looks forward to continuing working collaboratively with the DOB entities to ensure a safe, timely, and thorough decommissioning and site restoration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you. I believe that is all of the in-person registered speakers. Tom, is that correct?
That's correct.
So I see someone raising their hand. I'm sorry. Do you want to do a 3-minute? We can take.
Not even, probably.
Thank you. Great.
Hello, thank you everybody for spending your time and energy on this project, since it will keep us all alive, hopefully. The main thing that cannot be overlooked, although I appreciate the idea of corporate profit, that's why you do it. More important than that is public safety and public health. There is nothing that is more important than that. That includes all of us here, that includes everybody at wherever something would be shipped, and everybody in between this point and that point, because they are endangered when things are shipped. One thing that really caught my eye, I appreciate, Mr. Spagnola, you're showing up and talking to us, but I'm really curious as to what was so humorous with your friend who grabbed the mic when law ideas came up. You were smirking and laughing almost the entire time he was speaking, and I'm really looking for the humor in this because I'm missing it. Would you please share with us what was so outrageously humorous to you? I don't know your name, so I would. Yeah, you. Yeah, you were the one who was laughing and.
We had discussed this would be our response. So.
Oh, and that was funny. Okay, thank you. That's your answer then. Well, it's a shame that our welfare is such a dang joke. I am also a Vermonster. Now I live in Westchester, but I was in the thick of the Vermont Yankees stuff. And you know, the Connecticut River will never be the same. We cannot let that happen to the Hudson River. The Hudson River is the lifeblood, not only of New York State and the Hudson Valley, but also of the surrounding bays, water, groundwater, everything. I mean, there's so much life and so much important, not just historically, but just biologically. The Hudson River Valley is one of the most beautiful places there is. I think we all agree on that, or we wouldn't live here. But please, please let us work together to do whatever is the least harmful. Because, you know, even low-level radiation, you don't get cured from it. Once you are poisoned by radiation, you are poisoned.
30 seconds.
And it doesn't really take a $100 million study to know that. That is basically common knowledge. That's already been found out accidentally. So thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you. Please
Let's
state
all
your
keep living.
name. Please state your name for the record, please.
Oh, my name is Jane Sims. I live in Mohegan Lake, which is, my house has got to be a good 3.5 miles from here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, folks, we do offer many other opportunities to submit comments and questions. Any comments, questions that were raised at the mic tonight during the public statement hearing, we will endeavor to answer. We have Q&A on our website. You can submit questions or comments in written form through the DOB website.
We're not taking online comments?
Yeah, we are over time. We had 30 minutes scheduled out. We already went past that. And if, Tom, you can go to the next slide. Next meeting is June 13th, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.